Hello there, and welcome to the Quantum Slumber. Tonight I want to start with a question that feels a little unsettling in the best, quietest way. What if your dreams are not random at all? What if, on certain nights, what you called a dream is actually a memory that doesn't belong to this version of your life? And what if that deep, stubborn feeling you wake up with, that strange sense of familiarity, isn't just your brain remixing old moments, but your mind brushing against choices you never made, roads you never took, and a life that kept going somewhere else? Because most dreams vanish like mist, but some dreams do something different. They linger, they leave weight behind, they come with a texture that feels too detailed, too personal, too specific to be invented in a few minutes of sleep. You wake up and you don't just remember a scene, you remember a place, a layout, a street you could swear you've walked before, a conversation that feels unfinished, a version of you that feels oddly consistent. Now, tonight is not a claim. It's not a promise that your dreams are portals or proof of anything supernatural. It's a careful, slow exploration of a possibility, one that sits at the edge of what dream science can explain and at the edge of what modern physics even allows us to imagine. So if you're listening in bed or on a late drive or with the lights already low, let your shoulders soften a little. Let your breathing slow down. You don't have to solve anything tonight. You only have to listen and drift and stay curious. And if you enjoy these calm science stories designed for sleep, you can gently support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing a quick comment. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, or what the most unforgettable dream you've ever had felt like. Now, let's begin, the way all strange journeys begin, by stepping quietly into the dark and asking what might be waiting there. Most of us have been trained to treat dreams like mental weather. They roll in, they shift shape, they blow through. A strange collage of old conversations, half-remembered faces, and feelings that don't quite match the facts. And a lot of the time, that's a fair description. But every so often, a dream shows up with a different kind of seriousness. It doesn't feel like a collage. It feels like a place you've returned to. It feels like a chapter you stepped back into, mid-sentence, as if your mind didn't begin the story that night, but simply reopened it. That's the doorway we're standing near tonight. Not the doorway of certainty, and not the doorway of fantasy either. Something calmer, something more careful. A question that can be held in your hands without squeezing it into a yes or a no. Here's the question in its cleanest form. When a dream feels like another life, what is actually happening? To explore that without getting lost, it helps to separate three very different things that often get mixed together. First, there is dream science, the grounded, well-studied reality that the sleeping brain is active, patterned, and purposeful in ways we don't always appreciate. We know sleep reshapes memory. We know emotions are processed differently at night. We know the brain can build immersive worlds from fragments of experience, and we know those worlds can feel unbelievably vivid. In this layer, nothing supernatural is required. Dreams can feel meaningful because meaning is exactly what the brain is built to create, even when the inputs are messy, even when the story is impossible. The mind is a prediction machine, a storyteller, a pattern finder that never fully shuts off. And when the external world quiets down, the internal world gets louder. Second, there are quantum ideas. Not quantum as a spooky magic word, but quantum as the real physics that governs the small. This layer is true in the same way gravity is true. It's not a belief system, it's a framework that has been tested relentlessly. And it often behaves in ways that feel like a riddle. Probabilities instead of certainties, multiple possibilities described at once, outcomes that only become definite when an interaction forces the issue. Now, it's important to say this plainly. Quantum physics does not automatically mean mystical. Most quantum effects fade in warm, noisy environments. Most of the time, the brain looks like biology, not like a quantum computer. But the reason quantum ideas appear in conversations like this is simple. Quantum theory is one of the few places in modern science where many possibilities isn't just poetry, it's mathematics. Third, there is the claim that some people quietly carry in their chest after certain nights, the parallel dream claim, the feeling that a dream wasn't merely a dream, but a glimpse of a different branch of you, another life running alongside this one, a timeline where you moved to a different city, married a different person, walked into a different job, made a different choice at a single ordinary intersection. This third layer is the most fragile because it's the easiest to overstate. There is no established scientific proof that dreams are literal windows into alternate realities. No accepted mechanism that says, yes, your mind can hop between universes at night and bring back souvenirs. So why explore it at all? Because the human experience of it is real, even if the explanation remains uncertain. People report recurring dream locations with consistent layouts. They report dream relationships that carry emotional continuity, as if they have history. They report a sense of already lived that doesn't match any waking memory. And sometimes those experiences shape how they feel for days, as if they lost something, or returned from somewhere with a kind of homesickness. When experiences are that powerful, it's worth asking what they might be made of. Sometimes the answer will be ordinary. Memory is strange. The brain archives more than we realize. Familiarity can be manufactured by timing and attention. A forgotten detail can resurface with a feeling of revelation. A face can be assembled from pieces of dozens of faces. A place can be built from childhood rooms, a movie set, and a street you saw once through a car window. And sometimes the answer remains open-ended, not because science has failed, but because the mind is still one of the deepest frontiers we have. So tonight, the approach is simple. We'll stay loyal to what is known and honest about what is not. We'll treat the most extreme interpretations as possibilities, not conclusions. And we'll keep one steady goal in view, to make the question clearer, not louder. Because when you frame it that way, you don't have to choose between it's all nonsense and it's all true. You can stand in the middle, where curiosity is calm, and from that quiet middle place, the story can begin to unfold in a way that feels less like a claim, and more like a careful walk along the edge of something genuinely mysterious. Some dreams disappear the moment you wake up. They dissolve like mist, leaving behind only a vague impression that something happened. But then there are the other kinds, the ones that don't evaporate, the ones that cling. You open your eyes and the room is familiar. Your name is still your name. Your life is still waiting for you, exactly where you left it. And yet, somewhere inside your chest, a different reality is still warm, not in a dramatic movie-like way, in a quiet, unsettling way, like you stepped out of a place that has its own gravity. People often describe it the same way, even if they've never compared notes. They say the dream felt heavy. They say it felt specific. They say it felt more real than real. That phrase sounds impossible on the surface. After all, waking life has weight and texture and rules. Waking life is the one with receipts. And yet, the brain has a strange ability to manufacture conviction. Not just images, but certainty. Not just a story, but the feeling that the story is true. One reason is that dreaming is not simply watching pictures. It's a full-body simulation. When you're dreaming, you're not observing a scene from a distance the way you watch a screen. You're inside it. You have a body there. You have a point of view. You have goals and fears and impulses that feel urgent. Even more surprising, your brain doesn't stop doing what it does all day long. It keeps predicting what comes next. In waking life, prediction helps you survive. You learn the rhythm of your home, the tone of your partner's voice, the pattern of traffic lights, the expression someone makes when they're about to say something important. Your brain is constantly forecasting reality a half second ahead, smoothing out the world so it feels stable. In dreams, that same machine keeps running, but it's running without the usual anchor. There's no steady stream of sensory input to correct the simulation, so the dream can become unusually persuasive. The mind fills in gaps with confidence because it has no outside feedback telling it, no, that doesn't belong. And because there's no correction, the dream can slide into a kind of emotional purity. In many dreams, the details are wrong, but the feeling is precise. You might not remember what the street sign said. You might not remember the exact conversation, but you remember the sensation of being late, of being chosen, of being forgiven, of being watched, of being loved, of being ashamed. And those feelings aren't weak copies of waking emotions. Often they're amplified. That's partly because the sleeping brain changes its balance of control. When you're awake, there's a part of you that acts like a skeptical editor. It checks for contradictions. It notices when something doesn't add up. It asks, wait, why is my high school teacher in my kitchen? And why are we suddenly on a boat? In dreams, that editor gets quieter. Not always silent, but quieter. So the dream can present impossible events with a calm, unquestioned normalcy. You accept the bizarre, not because you're foolish, but because the brain systems that usually demand consistency are softened. The dream becomes less like a courtroom and more like a theater. And the theater has one job: to make you feel. This is where the more real than real sensation often starts. Not because dreams are literally truer than waking life, but because dreams can deliver emotional truth without friction. In waking life, emotions are tangled up with responsibilities. You can't fully feel grief because you have to make dinner. You can't fully feel joy because you're already bracing for tomorrow. You can't fully feel rage because you know you have to be polite. In a dream, those breaks can come off. The feeling can arrive uncut. And then something else happens that makes these dreams linger. The brain stores memory differently during sleep. It's not just filing away the day like a camera roll. It's mixing, compressing, replaying, and reweaving. It takes fragments of your experiences, your fears, your hopes, your unfinished conversations, and it tries to integrate them into your wider story. That can produce dreams that feel like they have history. Not just a setting, but a past. Not just a person, but a relationship. You might meet someone in a dream and feel instantly that you've known them for years, not in the casual sense of recognition, in the intimate sense of shared time. You can feel the shape of arguments you've had with them, the comfort of routines, the soft shorthand of inside jokes you never actually learned, and your waking mind says, that can't be real. But your dreaming mind doesn't argue. It simply knows. One of the most haunting features of these intense dreams is how they create familiarity out of nowhere. A street corner you swear you've walked before. A house you can navigate without thinking. A town with a layout you could draw from memory. Sometimes those places are composites, built from real locations you've seen across your life. A childhood hallway, the lighting of a motel, the geometry of a mall, the smell of a relative's kitchen. The dream stitches them together into a new map. And because the ingredients are real, the result feels real too. But sometimes the familiarity feels too complete, too coherent, too continuous. And that's when people start reaching for bigger explanations. Because more real than real isn't only about vivid imagery, it's about the aftertaste. You wake up and you don't just remember the dream, you miss it. Not like you miss a good movie, like you miss a place you belonged, like you're grieving something your waking life cannot account for. Some people describe it as a quiet heartbreak, a low ache that follows them through breakfast and into the afternoon. They feel disoriented, like they've returned from a trip and part of them is still standing somewhere else, watching a different sky. This is especially common with dreams involving family, love, and long timelines. A dream can give you years in a night. It can hand you a child you never had, a home you never bought, a partner you never met. And because the emotion is so immediate, waking up can feel like loss. Not abstract loss, but personal loss. The brain doesn't treat emotional bonds as fiction just because they happened in sleep. Bonds are bonds. The feeling systems light up, the attachment circuits engage, the sense of belonging forms. And then, abruptly, the dream ends. That sudden ending is part of what makes it feel so real. Real life doesn't wrap up neatly. It cuts off, it interrupts, it leaves unfinished business. Dreams that end mid-story can mirror that same brutal realism. Another reason these dreams feel unusually vivid is that the brain can tag them as important. In waking life, we remember what feels meaningful. That's not a poetic statement, it's how memory works. Emotion acts like a highlighter. It tells the brain, Keep this. Store this. This matters. So if a dream triggers intense fear, intense love, intense awe, or intense grief, it's more likely to be remembered, and the act of remembering strengthens it further. Each time you replay it, you polish it. Each time you revisit the feeling, it becomes more anchored. Then there's the strangest detail of all. Sometimes the dream doesn't just feel vivid, it feels intelligent. Not like a random slideshow, but like an experience that responds to you. Like the world inside the dream has a logic that isn't fully under your control. Characters surprise you. Conversations go, places you didn't plan. Events unfold with a kind of autonomy. And that can be deeply unsettling because it challenges a comforting assumption that the dream is simply you talking to yourself. But even this can have a grounded explanation. Your brain is not one voice, it's a society. Multiple systems, multiple motives, multiple layers of processing happening at once. In a dream, it can feel like you're encountering other minds, when you're really encountering other parts of your own mind, running their own scripts. Still, the subjective experience can't be powerful enough to make you wonder. Because when a dream has continuity, emotional weight, vivid sensory presence, and a world that seems to move on its own, it stops feeling like a random story. It starts feeling like a life. And that's the key idea to hold gently here. The sense of reality is something the brain generates. It's not a stamp that only waking life can access. It's a feeling that can be dialed up or down, depending on brain state, chemistry, attention, and emotion. So, when someone says, that dream felt more real than real, they're not necessarily making a claim about the universe. They may be describing a shift in how their mind constructed reality that night. A temporary world with the volume turned up. A place where emotion ran cleanly through the system. A story that wasn't weighed down by errands, screens, and daylight logic. And if you've ever had a dream like that, you know the strange part isn't the dream itself. The strange part is the morning after. The way you can sit in your real kitchen, holding a real cup, in a real body, and still feel the echo of another existence in the quietest corners of your mind. Not as proof, not as a conclusion, just as a lingering question you can't quite shake. In 1957, a young physicist named Hugh Everett quietly offered an idea that still feels like it belongs in a midnight conversation. Not because it was mystical, but because it was almost too literal. He looked at the equations of quantum physics and asked a simple question. What if we stop adding an extra rule that says the universe must choose only one outcome? In the everyday world, choices feel clean. You turn left or right. You accept the job or you don't. You pick up the phone or you let it ring. One story continues and the others vanish. But deep down, in the math of quantum mechanics, reality does not begin with a single story. It begins with a spread of possibilities, a kind of quiet overlap, where more than one outcome can coexist in the description of the world. This is the heart of the puzzle that has haunted physics for a century. The equations describe a smooth, continuous evolution of possibilities. Yet our experience feels like a crisp snap into one result. One reading on the meter, one dot on the screen, one cat that is either alive or not. So many interpretations of quantum mechanics are, in one way or another, attempts to explain that snap. They differ in what they think is real and what they think is just a tool. Everett's move was almost unsettling in its calmness. He said, suppose there is no snap. Suppose the wave function, the mathematical object that carries all the possibilities, is not merely a bookkeeping device. Suppose it is the literal description of reality, and suppose it never collapses. Then the moment you call a measurement becomes something else entirely. It becomes a split in the story. Not a split created by human observation, as if your eyes were magic, but a split created by interaction. The measuring device becomes entangled with what it measures. The environment becomes entangled with both. The information spreads out, and the different outcomes stop being able to interfere with one another. In that view, the universe does not select one result and delete the rest. It carries them forward, each in its own branch, each consistent within itself. It sounds dramatic when you say it quickly, so it helps to say it gently. Many worlds is not claiming that new universes pop into existence like soap bubbles in space. The language of worlds can be misleading. What it's really describing is a single quantum reality that contains multiple non-communicating versions of the story once those versions become effectively separated. Later ideas, especially decoherence, help make this separation feel less like fantasy and more like a natural consequence of physics. Decoherence is the process by which fragile quantum overlap gets washed out by the environment. The world is loud with interactions. Air molecules, photons, vibrations, heat. Those interactions scramble the delicate phase relationships that would allow different outcomes to interfere. The result is that the overlapping possibilities stop behaving like one coherent quantum blur and start behaving like distinct, classical-looking histories. You can think of it as the universe losing the ability to keep the alternatives in the same room. Not because someone is policing reality, but because the room becomes too crowded, too noisy, too entangled. And here's the subtle psychological twist that makes many worlds feel so haunting. If the theory is right, there isn't just one you making one choice. There is a you who took the job and a you who didn't. A you who stayed in that city and a you who left. A you who said yes and a you who said no. A you who met that person and a you who never crossed paths. Each version feels continuous from the inside. Each one has memories that line up, a past that makes sense, a present that feels solid. From within any branch, it feels like the universe chose, because that is how consciousness experiences a single coherent narrative. But many worlds suggests the deeper truth may be that reality did not choose, reality carried. Now, it's crucial to keep the ground under our feet here. Many worlds is an interpretation. It does not change the predictions of standard quantum mechanics in the usual way. In many situations, it matches the same experimental results as other interpretations. That means it's hard, sometimes impossible, to test as a unique claim, depending on how you define it. So, we're not talking about a proven multiverse you can visit. We're talking about a doorway in the mind, a way of looking at the same physics that makes the universe feel strangely roomy, like it contains more than the narrow hallway of your lived experience. And that is exactly why it becomes relevant to the way certain dreams feel. Because some dreams don't just present random scenes, they present a version of you, a version that seems to have a life already in motion, a life with its own momentum, its own relationships, its own history that you did not consciously invent. You might dream that you live in a different house, in a different city, with a different partner, and it doesn't feel like dress up. It feels like you've been there for years. The routines are already carved in. The emotional attachments are already formed. You wake up with the strange impression that you didn't merely imagine a possibility. You temporarily inhabited it. In the strict scientific sense, dreams can be explained without invoking parallel branches at all. Dreams remix memory, emotion, and expectation into simulations that can feel coherent and meaningful. The brain is extraordinarily good at building a world and then convincing you that you belong in it. But the many worlds lens does something powerful for storytelling. It gives a name to the intuition that reality might not be a single track. It suggests that the life you're living is not the only life that is consistent with the past. It's simply the one your awareness is riding right now, like a train traveling one line through an enormous network. And if that metaphor lands, it raises a gentle question rather than a loud claim. If the underlying fabric of reality can contain multiple consistent outcomes, could the mind sometimes generate experiences that resemble those other outcomes, not as literal travel, but as a kind of internal sampling of unrealized paths? Not proof, not evidence, just a possibility that fits the mood of the question. Because dreams are already the mind's way of rehearsing, revisiting, and reshaping reality. They are where the brain explores fear without danger, love without permission, loss without warning, and possibility without consequence. So, when a dream feels like another life, the many worlds idea doesn't need to be taken as fact to be useful. It can be a framework that honors the strangeness without turning it into certainty. It can let you say, maybe reality is wider than it feels, and maybe the sleeping mind sometimes brushes against that wideness in its own symbolic way. And whether you treat that as philosophy, as poetry, or as a serious contender in physics, it leaves you with a quiet, lingering thought. Your life feels singular because you experience it from the inside. But the universe, according to at least one calm and radical interpretation, may never have been obligated to be singular at all. There's a quiet riddle sitting underneath almost every conversation about dreams, consciousness, and alternate selves. It's not a mystical riddle, it's a timing riddle. Because whatever your mind is doing, it's doing it fast. Not in the way a computer is fast, but in the way a living storm is fast. A trillion tiny events scattered across a warm, wet brain, somehow shaping one smooth experience that feels continuous and whole. Think about how your life arrives to you. You don't hear a sound and then, a second later, see the scene. You don't feel the temperature of the air and then wait for your emotions to catch up. You live inside a single moment that seems stitched together. Sight, sound, memory, meaning, body, and mood. And that stitching together is not simple. Your brain is not one camera or one microphone. It's a crowd. Vision is processed in many pathways: color, motion, edges, faces, depth. Sound is processed in layers too: pitch, rhythm, location, language. Touch has its own map. Balance has its own map. Emotion has its own circuitry. Memory has its own circuitry. Attention has its own circuitry. If you were to open the hood and look for the place where it all becomes you wouldn't find a single control room with one little operator. You'd find a network. So here's the puzzle. How does a network produce one unified point of view? Neuroscientists sometimes call this the binding problem. How does the brain bind features into objects, and objects into scenes, and scenes into a story that feels like one life? When you see a red apple rolling across a table, red is handled by one set of processes, round by another, motion by another, appleness by another, that's mine by another, I want it by another. Yet you don't experience any of that as separate. You experience one apple. Now zoom out from apples to entire lives. In waking life, the brain has guardrails. Your senses constantly update you. Your prefrontal cortex helps with reality testing. Attention keeps your story aligned to the outside world. Your identity stays relatively stable. But dreams loosen those guardrails, and that's where this timing riddle starts to feel relevant to the question of other lives. Because in a dream, your brain still binds, it still stitches, it still produces a world. Sometimes it produces a world so coherent that you wake up with a strange grief, as if you left somewhere real. So the question becomes, what is the stitching mechanism, and why does it sometimes feel different in sleep? Here's one of the most fascinating facts about your brain. The signals inside it don't travel instantly. They have delays. Tiny ones, yes, milliseconds. But milliseconds matter when you're trying to coordinate a planet-sized symphony of neurons. Even in the simple act of seeing, information is processed in stages. Your brain is constantly comparing, predicting, correcting. The experience you call now is actually the brain's best guess, assembled from signals that arrived at slightly different times. And yet, you don't feel like a delay. You feel like a seamless present. Your mind, in other words, is doing real-time editing. It's taking a messy flood of fragments and producing one clean movie. Some researchers describe consciousness less like a spotlight and more like a broadcast. Many subsystems send information. A smaller set gets amplified into the main stage of awareness. Other processes happen quietly in the background, influencing you without feeling like you. That picture can explain why you can drive home and barely remember the trip. The car stayed on the road. Your eyes saw. Your hands moved, but the broadcast was elsewhere. The stitching was still happening, yet your conscious narrative wasn't paying attention to every seam. Now bring this into the dream state. In dreams, the outside world is mostly muted. The broadcast is fed from within. Memory fragments, emotions, fears, desires, leftover concerns. A face you saw once in a grocery store. A line from a song, a childhood hallway that your brain can still render with perfect lighting. The stitching mechanism is still working, but the inputs are different. And here's where the brain speed puzzle becomes a doorway for a more speculative thought. A dream can generate a city you've never visited, with streets that feel familiar. It can generate conversations with people who seem to have their own agenda, surprising you, even though they are made of you. It can generate timelines that feel stretched, where a single night contains the emotional weight of months. How does the brain do that? One grounded answer is that the brain is a prediction engine. It is constantly generating models of the world and updating them when reality disagrees. In dreams, reality doesn't disagree as loudly. So, the model can drift, it can explore, it can improvise. Another grounded answer is that memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Each time you remember, you rebuild. Dreams are the brain rebuilding without asking permission from the waking self. But some people look at the speed and unity of experience and feel a deeper itch. Because the brain is not just fast, it is coordinated. Billions of cells firing in patterns, synchronizing across distances, forming rhythms that can sweep the cortex like waves. There are oscillations, timing cycles, repeating pulses of activity that help regions communicate. When timing aligns, information can integrate. When timing fails, the experience can fragment. This is why certain disorders of consciousness are so eerie. The hardware is still there, but the integration changes, the broadcast weakens, the stitching becomes partial. So, the itch is, what is the fundamental clock, the deeper layer that allows all this integration to feel like one moment? Most scientists work comfortably within classical biology here. Electrochemical signals, network dynamics, feedback loops, thalamus-cortex coordination, neurotransmitters tuning the system like dials. That story is already incredible. Yet a smaller, more controversial line of thought tries to push even deeper. It says, maybe the brain's coordination is not only chemical and electrical. Maybe, in certain microenvironments, something subtler could contribute to timing and coherence. Not as a magical consciousness ingredient, not as proof of anything paranormal. More like this. In other parts of nature, there are hints that quantum effects can show up in biological systems under the right conditions. If that's true in a few specialized corners of life, it raises a cautious question. Could there be tiny physical processes inside the brain that we don't fully understand yet? Processes that influence timing, noise, or synchronization? Most neuroscientists would say, you don't need that to explain dreaming or consciousness. And they may be right. But the reason this idea keeps resurfacing is emotional as much as intellectual. People are trying to explain why experience feels like a single stream when the brain is a distributed crowd. They're trying to explain why dreams can feel like lived worlds. They're trying to explain why, some nights, you wake up with the sense that you didn't just imagine a story, you returned from one. And again, the careful stance matters. A powerful feeling is not the same as a measurement. A coherent dream is not the same as evidence of another universe. What we can say is simpler and still fascinating. The brain is capable of building a reality so convincing that it can temporarily overwrite the waking sense of self. And it can do it with astonishing speed, astonishing coordination, and astonishing emotional weight, which makes the next question feel almost unavoidable. If life depends on delicate timing and coordination to create one you in waking hours, what changes in sleep could make that coordination feel different, looser, more surreal, more expansive? And if the story grows more expansive, it becomes tempting in a quiet way to wonder whether the mind is merely improvising, or whether it is sampling possibilities in a deeper sense. That's the doorway. Not a conclusion, just a carefully opened door. There's a reason the brain speed puzzle makes people reach for deeper physics. When you stare at the sheer coordination of the mind, It can feel like you're watching a miracle performed in slow, quiet strokes. A warm biological organ, built from cells and salt and electricity, somehow producing a single inner movie that feels continuous. Most of the time, the most honest answer is also the simplest. Biology is enough. Neurons talk, networks synchronize, chemistry tunes the whole system like a set of dimmer switches. Nothing supernatural required. And still, a small question lingers in the background, not as a declaration, but as a gentle curiosity. If the brain is a choir, what keeps it singing in time? That question becomes even more tempting in sleep, when the choir is still singing, but the audience is gone. The outside world is quieter. The internal world grows louder. The rules loosen. The mind becomes dreamlike, and the dream becomes convincing. So, before we step anywhere near bold claims, it helps to pause at a calmer, more grounded place first. A place where scientists have already seen something surprising. Not in brains necessarily, in nature. Because over the last few decades, researchers have found a handful of biological systems that behave in ways that look, at least in certain experiments, like they're borrowing a trick from quantum physics. Quantum physics is usually the science of the very small. It's the rulebook for electrons, photons, atoms. And we're often taught that it stays locked down there, because the larger a system gets, the faster it loses its delicate quantum specialness. Heat, noise, and complexity tend to wash those effects out. So, when biologists and physicists began seeing quantum-like signatures in living systems, it raised eyebrows for a very reasonable reason. Living things are warm, living things are wet, living things are messy. And yet, in a few rare corners, nature seems to have found ways to do something that resembles quantum efficiency. One famous example comes from photosynthesis, the quiet engine behind most life on Earth. Plants and certain bacteria take sunlight and funnel that energy into chemical storage. The astonishing part is how efficiently some of them move that energy through their molecular machinery. In some lab studies, the transfer looks less like a clumsy random walk and more like a smooth search, as if the energy explores multiple pathways and lands on the best route. Scientists debate how literally to interpret that, and under which conditions it truly holds. But even the conservative version of the story is still beautiful. Nature may use subtle physical effects to reduce waste, to move energy with grace. Another example comes from migratory birds. Some birds can sense Earth's magnetic field, and they can navigate with it like an invisible map. One proposed mechanism, still actively studied and argued over, involves molecules in the bird's eye where light triggers paired electrons. Those electrons may behave in a coordinated way that is sensitive to magnetic fields, influencing chemical reactions that the brain can ultimately interpret as direction. Again, you don't need to call it magic. It's chemistry and physics doing what they do, but it's chemistry that may depend in part on quantum properties of electrons. A third example is even more familiar and a little more startling: quantum tunneling. In the classical world, a particle needs enough energy to cross a barrier. No energy, no crossing. But at the quantum level, particles can sometimes tunnel through barriers they shouldn't be able to cross. Not because they break the rules, but because the rules are written differently down there. In biology, tunneling has been proposed in certain enzyme reactions, where tiny particles like electrons or protons move in ways that appear too fast or too efficient for purely classical explanations. Enzymes are the molecular machines that keep you alive. They speed up chemical reactions with incredible precision. If tunneling plays a role in some of that, it means life may quietly rely on quantum behavior every moment without ever announcing it. And then there's the sense of smell, which has its own controversial quantum-flavored ideas. Some hypotheses suggest that smell might involve not just shape matching, but tiny vibrational signatures, possibly connected to electron behavior. That area is debated, and it's not settled science. But it's another example of the same theme. Once you look closely enough, biology can surprise you. So, what are we supposed to do with all of this? Not leap, not declare, aha, the brain must be quantum. That jump is too large, too fast, and too tempting. Instead, the responsible takeaway is gentler. Quantum effects are not automatically forbidden in living systems. They are difficult, they are fragile. They may require special structures or timing or shielding or tricks we don't fully understand. But nature is not obligated to respect our intuition about what should be possible. Which brings us back to the dream question. If a handful of biological systems can preserve delicate physical behavior long enough to matter, then it becomes at least imaginable, in principle, that other biological systems might contain microenvironments where subtle effects contribute to function. That is a very different statement from saying those effects create consciousness. A very different statement from saying dreams are alternate lives. And a very different statement from saying you are traveling between universes at night. Those claims are extraordinary, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What we're doing here is building a bridge made of cautious language, because the moment we say quantum, people tend to hear certainty, they hear mysticism, they hear permission to believe anything. Tonight is not that. Tonight is careful. So here's the bridge, stated plainly. Dream science is real. We can measure sleep stages. We can see patterns in brain activity. We can study memory consolidation and emotion processing. We can talk to lucid dreamers in controlled settings. All of that lives firmly in the world of evidence. Quantum physics is also real. It's among the most successful theories in human history, and it governs the tiny ingredients of reality. Quantum biology is a smaller, more specialized area where researchers explore whether quantum behavior plays functional roles in certain biological processes. Some examples are promising, some are debated, and many are still being tested. And the claim that dreams might connect to parallel lives sits beyond the evidence. It's speculative. It's not proven. It's a story-shaped hypothesis people reach for when the subjective power of dreaming feels too intense to dismiss. That's the honest map, but it's also true that maps have edges. And near the edge, people ask daring questions. Questions like, if the brain's unity depends on timing, coordination, and microscopic physical processes, could there be layers beneath what we currently model? Could there be hidden contributors to synchronization we haven't fully captured yet? Could sleep alter those contributors in subtle ways, making the mind feel less anchored to a single narrative? Those are questions, not answers, and they set the stage for the next idea we'll explore, the one that tends to sound the most dramatic. The notion that something like entanglement or quantum-like coordination could play a role in the brain. It's controversial, it's debated, and it sits right on the line between intriguing and overreaching, which is exactly why we're approaching it the way we are, slowly, carefully, with wonder in one hand and skepticism in the other. There's a particular kind of idea that shows up whenever people try to connect dreams to something bigger than the brain. It sounds almost too delicate to survive in a warm, wet skull, and yet it keeps returning, decade after decade, in slightly different forms. The idea is this: somewhere inside the brain, there might be a physical quiet zone where light can behave in unusually organized ways. Not the light you see with your eyes, not a glow you'd notice in a dark room, but tiny ultra-faint flashes that some researchers call biophotons. Biophotons are not a mystical concept. Cells can emit extremely weak photons during normal metabolic activity. It's a reported phenomenon in biology, and the basic claim is modest. Living tissue can produce a whisper of light as chemistry happens. The controversial leap begins when someone asks a second question. What if that whisper isn't just waste? What if, in some narrow and rare circumstances, those photons could carry information inside the brain? And then comes the third question, the one that makes people sit up. If photons can carry information, and if photons can become correlated in ways that quantum physics allows, could the brain be using something like quantum correlation, or even something that gets described as entanglement? To be very clear, mainstream neuroscience does not rely on this idea. You can explain perception, memory, learning, and dreaming without it. Most scientists would tell you that the brain is noisy, chaotic, and warm, and that quantum effects of the fragile, laboratory kind should wash out quickly. That's the standard objection, and it's a strong one. Still, a controversial line of research has tried to imagine how the brain might protect delicate signals long enough to matter. And one of the structures that gets mentioned is myelin. Myelin is the insulation around many nerve fibers. You can think of it like the protective coating on a wire, helping electrical signals travel faster and more reliably. It's one of the reasons certain neural pathways can transmit information with impressive speed. Now here's the speculative twist. Some researchers have proposed that, beyond its electrical role, myelin might also create a physical geometry that could guide light. In the same way that a fiber optic cable can guide photons down a path, certain layered structures can, in theory, channel light rather than letting it scatter in every direction. If that sounds like science fiction, it's worth pausing on the fact that this is a real concept in physics. A waveguide is simply a structure that can confine and direct waves. In everyday life, fiber optics guide light. In other contexts, metal tubes can guide microwaves. The idea is not weird by itself. The question is whether anything like that happens in the brain, in any meaningful way. Proponents of this hypothesis imagine that myelinated axons could act as microscopic corridors, reducing scattering, creating a little more order than you would otherwise expect in living tissue. In the most ambitious versions of the idea, these corridors could allow photons to travel between regions, linking distant parts of the brain with a signal that is not purely electrical. From there, you can see why the word entanglement sometimes enters the conversation. Photons can be produced in correlated pairs in laboratories, and entanglement is a specific quantum relationship that can exist between particles when they share a single combined state. When you hear people talk about entanglement, it's often framed as eerie, like a connection that reaches across distance. The reality is more subtle. Entanglement is a relationship between measurements, and it's fragile. It requires isolation from the environment to persist. The brain is the opposite of isolated. So, when careful researchers discuss these ideas, they usually use softer language. They talk about quantum coherence, or quantum correlation, or entanglement-like relationships, rather than claiming full, long-lived entanglement operating as a brain-wide network. Even that softer language is debated, and the evidence is not settled. But let's stay with the shape of the claim, because it has a very specific role in the kind of story we're exploring tonight. If, and it's a big if, photons could travel within the brain through structures that protect their state, and if, and it's another big if, some form of quantum correlation could persist long enough to influence processing, then the brain might have access to a kind of binding mechanism that is not purely classical. And that idea becomes tempting because one of the oldest puzzles about consciousness is binding. Your brain processes color in one set of circuits, movement in another, faces in another, emotions in another, and yet your experience arrives as one seamless scene, one story, one you watching it happen. Neuroscience has many strong explanations for how integration occurs through synchronized firing, recurrent networks, and attention systems. Those explanations are powerful, but when people feel the eerie wholeness of a dream, especially a dream that feels more vivid than waking life, the mind naturally reaches for a different metaphor, something that ties it all together in a single knot. Quantum correlation is a knot-shaped metaphor. Now, there is another ingredient that tends to show up alongside this: microtubules. Microtubules are structural components inside cells, including neurons. They are part of the cell's internal scaffolding and transport system. Some theories have proposed that microtubules could support unusual physical states, possibly influencing cognition in ways we don't yet understand. This is where the conversation becomes even more controversial, because the claims move beyond maybe there are tiny photons and into maybe there is quantum processing inside neurons. That is not a mainstream view, and it remains heavily debated. But in the competitor-style narrative, these details function like stepping stones. Each one is presented as proposed, suggested, not proven, and yet placed carefully enough that the listener can feel the possibility without being asked to accept it as fact. And then the story ties those stepping stones to dreaming, because dreaming is a unique state. During certain stages of sleep, the brain's relationship to the outside world changes. Sensory input is reduced. The prefrontal systems that constantly test reality tend to loosen. Emotional networks can become more active. Memory fragments float more freely. In that altered balance, the mind can create scenes that feel complete, immersive, and strangely self-consistent. If you already believe that consciousness is normally locked into a single coherent narrative, it becomes easy to imagine that sleep might slightly relax the lock. And if you are already holding a quantum metaphor in your mind, sleep becomes the moment when the system is less constrained, less measured, less forced into one tidy outcome. That is the poetic leap. It is not a proven mechanism. It is a way of talking about an experience that feels like it came from somewhere else. The strongest versions of this claim sometimes go even further and suggest that dream content could be influenced by information that is not contained in your ordinary memories. That can slide quickly into paranormal territory, which is why responsible storytelling here matters. Because the line between intriguing speculation and false certainty can blur if you aren't careful. So, let's keep the ground under our feet. What do we actually know with confidence? We know the brain is an electrical and chemical organ. We know dreams are shaped by memory, emotion, and perception systems that continue to operate during sleep. We know the dreaming brain can generate hyper-real scenes with no external input. We know people can experience déjà vu, false familiarity, and intense feelings of meaning without any outside cause. We know that subtle cues can shape dream content in surprising ways. We also know that quantum physics is real and that biology sometimes surprises us. There are examples in nature where quantum effects appear to play a role at small scales under certain conditions. That doesn't automatically mean the brain uses quantum tricks to think, but it means the question isn't absurd to ask. What remains unproven is the specific story. Photons traveling through myelin as a meaningful information network, maintaining quantum correlations that influence consciousness, and then producing dreams that access something like alternate lives. That story is a hypothesis stack, where each layer depends on the one beneath it. If one layer fails, the whole tower becomes less likely. And yet, even as a tower of maybes, it can still be useful in a different way, because it gives us a vocabulary for a feeling many people recognize. The feeling that a dream wasn't just a movie your brain played, but a place you visited, a place with its own physics, its own continuity, its own emotional gravity. In that vocabulary, the brain isn't only a projector, it's also a receiver, not in a magical sense, in a systems sense. A network that can tune itself into different patterns depending on state, chemistry, and context. Waking is one tuning, dreaming is another, and the experience of more real than real might be what it feels like when the tuning shifts. So, when you hear the phrase entangled photons in the brain, it helps to translate it into calmer, more accurate language. A controversial idea proposes that ultra-faint light in biology could play a role in neural communication, and that certain brain structures might support more organized signal behavior than expected. Some people speculate about quantum correlations as a metaphor, or as a possible mechanism, but it remains debated and unconfirmed. That's the careful version. And the reason it belongs in this story is not because it proves anything. It's because it builds a bridge between two kinds of mystery. The mystery of dreaming, which we can study, and the mystery of consciousness, which still resists a final explanation. If your dreams ever felt like they carried an impossible coherence, like a thread connecting you to a life you don't remember living, then you already know why this hypothesis has such a grip on the imagination. It isn't asking you to believe in magic. It's asking you to notice how strange your own mind already is. And once you notice that, the next question almost asks itself, if the brain can generate a whole world from within, what exactly is it doing when it feels like it's receiving one? Some ideas don't arrive like a headline. They arrive like a quiet question that refuses to leave. If the universe is truly quantum all the way down, then the future is not a single rail you ride forward. It's more like a wide fan of possibilities, each one carrying a slightly different version of what could happen next. In some interpretations, every outcome that can happen does happen, somewhere in the branching structure of reality. And if that's even remotely close to the truth, it raises a strangely intimate problem, because you only ever experience one of those outcomes. You don't feel the fork. You don't hear the branches. You wake up inside one clean storyline, with one name, one body, one set of memories that feel continuous. The world doesn't present itself as a shimmering cloud of options. It presents itself as a stable room with solid edges. So, the question becomes less about physics and more about experience. What is it that turns a messy universe of possibilities into one simple sentence that your mind calls now? One way to picture it is like a film editor sitting at a desk late at night. Imagine miles of raw footage spread across the table, every camera angle, every take, every possible cut. The editor doesn't create the footage. The editor selects, stitches, and smooths it into a coherent story that can be watched from beginning to end. In this metaphor, the raw footage is the universe's menu of possible outcomes, and consciousness is the editor, not a magical force that changes physics, but a process that binds experience into a single thread, moment by moment, so that life feels like one lived life instead of 1,000 overlapping drafts. Some researchers and technologists have toyed with this kind of framing because it explains a very ordinary mystery. You don't experience reality as probabilities. You experience it as a decision already made. Even inside your own mind, countless possibilities compete. Your brain is constantly predicting, revising, choosing what matters, suppressing what doesn't, compressing oceans of information into a usable, human-scale world. You don't notice the internal debate. You notice the final headline. In that sense, selection is already happening before we ever mention parallel worlds. Now add the quantum layer, and the metaphor becomes more provocative. Not because your mind would be jumping between universes like a science fiction traveler. That leap is not supported. But because, at the most philosophical edge, you could wonder whether awareness is the final stage of a selection pipeline, a kind of binding agent that takes whatever reality becomes available to you and makes it feel like one continuous story. And this is where the claim gets both intriguing and slippery. In mainstream physics, the safe statement is that quantum systems evolve according to quantum rules, and when they interact with their environment, those delicate quantum possibilities become effectively washed out. The world looks classical because the environment constantly measures it in a practical sense. That process doesn't require minds. It requires interactions. So, if anyone suggests that consciousness is literally choosing a branch of the universe, it belongs in the category of speculation. It's a story-shaped idea, a way to make the strangeness intuitive, not a settled result. But as a bedtime thought experiment, it does something powerful. It reframes waking life as a tight grip. When you're awake, your mind is a disciplined narrator. It keeps your identity consistent. It keeps time mostly linear. It keeps your body at the center of the map. It rejects most anomalies. It edits out contradictions. It holds the world steady enough for you to cross a street, remember a password, and recognize your own face. That steadiness is not free, it's work. And sleep changes the job description. During dreaming, especially in the vivid kind, the narrator loosens. The editor relaxes their rules. The brain can stitch together scenes that don't belong together. It can generate people who feel independent. It can create places that feel remembered, even if you've never been there. It can let time bend without anyone filing a complaint. So, in this speculative framing, sleep isn't just rest. It's a different mode of selection. Not selection between universes in any proven way, but selection between stories inside the mind. Selection between what gets bound into me and what gets left floating as a strange, half-forgotten possibility. And that brings us to the emotional hook of this idea. Because what makes the parallel life thought so sticky isn't the physics. It's the feeling that sometimes appears in dreams like a scent you can't name. The feeling that you belong there. The feeling that the dream isn't merely a scene, but a continuation. That you have a past in that place. That you have habits there. That you have relationships there that didn't begin 5 minutes ago. If waking consciousness is an editor that prioritizes stability, then a dream might be what happens when the editor experiments, when it tries on alternate cuts, when it plays with different continuity, when it allows a version of you to exist without fully checking it against the waking record. And if you're in the mood to wonder one step further, you can imagine a softer possibility still. Maybe the mind doesn't create the dream world from nothing. Maybe it tunes into patterns it normally ignores. Maybe it samples from a wider space of potential narratives, not as a supernatural ability, but as a byproduct of how brains generate models of reality. Because brains are prediction machines. They don't simply record the world, they simulate it constantly. They run models, they test outcomes, they rehearse futures, they repackage the past. And in sleep, with the normal guardrails lowered, those simulations can feel less like rehearsal and more like reality itself. So if someone says, consciousness selects a branch, a careful listener hears it in 2 layers. In the literal layer, it's unproven and controversial. In the metaphor layer, it's quietly true. Your awareness selects a story. It selects what counts as you. It selects what counts as now. It selects which sensations become the world and which sensations fade into the background as noise. And tonight, we're simply letting that metaphor breathe, letting it hover at the edge of the bed, where science and imagination sometimes share the same dim lamp. Because if sleep loosens the grip of one story, even slightly, it might explain why dreams can feel like they're brushing against something bigger than memory. Not evidence, not proof, just a strangely persistent question. What if, when the editor rests, the raw footage gets a little louder? Waking life has a certain stiffness to it, not in a bad way, more like the stiffness of a well-made bridge. Every second, your brain is keeping the world stable enough for you to walk across it. It holds your name in place. It keeps your body at the center of the map. It makes time feel like a single, forward-moving ribbon. It keeps yesterday behind you and tomorrow ahead of you. It makes other people feel consistent, as if they exist in one clean version too. That stability feels natural, but it's actually expensive, because the raw material of experience is messy. Light hits your eyes as a blur of brightness and shadow. Sound arrives as overlapping waves. Your body sends signals constantly, most of them irrelevant to survival or meaning. Your memory is incomplete. Your attention is narrow, so the brain does what it always does. It edits. It predicts what should be there and fills in gaps. It suppresses contradictions. It chooses one interpretation of an ambiguous scene. It smooths over tiny jumps in attention and turns them into continuity. It marks one set of sensations as me and everything else as not me. It keeps the inner narrator on a tight leash, because if the narrator wandered too far, the world would feel unreliable. And then you fall asleep. Sleep doesn't turn the brain off. It changes the rules of the edit. In a vivid dream, the world can become astonishingly detailed. But the kind of detail it prefers is different. It's less about accuracy and more about emotional truth. A dream may give you the exact feeling of walking through a childhood neighborhood without reproducing the real streets. It may give you the precise weight of grief or relief or longing without giving you a clear reason for it. It may hand you a face you can't place, and yet your whole nervous system reacts as if this person matters. This is one reason dreams can feel looser, not because they are weak or faint. Often they feel stronger than waking life, but because they are less policed. In REM sleep, the brain is in a state that's almost designed for strange freedom. It's active, it's vivid, it's internally driven. The usual systems that keep reality checked and verified are not operating in the same way. The waking mind has a habit of asking, is this plausible? Is this consistent? Does this match what I know? In dreaming, that referee is quieter. And when the referee is quieter, the game changes. Time can stretch. A conversation can contain the emotional weight of months, even if it lasts seconds. You can move from a kitchen to a parking lot to a coastline without any sense that something is wrong. People can shift identity mid-sentence. Places can be both familiar and impossible. You accept it, not because you're gullible, but because the dreaming brain has different priorities. It's not trying to manage the external world. It's trying to process the internal one. That looseness becomes even more interesting when you look at what the brain is doing with the sense of self. In waking life, the self is a strong, continuous anchor. It's the thread that holds the story together. In dreams, that thread can fray. Not always. Sometimes you feel perfectly like yourself, but sometimes you feel like a different age, a different temperament, a different person with a different history. You may have skills you don't have when awake. You may be braver, colder, gentler, more reckless. You may behave as if you have obligations and relationships that do not exist in your waking biography. And your brain doesn't flag it as a problem. It simply builds a world where that version of you makes sense. That is the strange trick of dreaming. It doesn't just show you images. It gives those images a backstory on the spot. It generates continuity. It creates the feeling of having lived there for a long time, even if you arrived 30 seconds ago. When someone describes a parallel life dream, they often describe that exact sensation. Not a random scene, but a place with history. A life with routines. A city you could navigate. People who knew you the way neighbors know you, with a casual familiarity that can't be faked easily. So, here's the careful science-adjacent question. What makes the brain capable of that kind of world building? One answer is simply that the brain is a simulator. Even while you are awake, you are not seeing the world directly. You are seeing the brain's best guess of the world, updated constantly by your senses. Perception is controlled hallucination, anchored by reality. That's not an insult. It's a compliment to how elegant your nervous system is. It turns noise into meaning. It turns fragments into a scene. It makes reality feel effortless. Dreaming is what happens when the simulator runs with less external input and fewer constraints. It is a model of reality without the usual fact-checking. And that's why it can be so creative, so bizarre, and so emotionally honest. Because the moment you remove the strict requirement to match the outside world, the simulator can do other jobs. It can rehearse threats. It can test social situations. It can weave emotional loose ends into stories. It can run alternate outcomes. It can stitch together memories that were never connected in waking life. It can take a small fear and give it a body, a hallway, a pursuer, a door that won't open. It can also take a hope you barely admit to yourself and give it a full landscape. Now, bring back the earlier speculative idea, very gently. If waking consciousness feels like a tight grip on one storyline, sleep might be a loosened grip. Not a release into supernatural travel, but a release into possibility. A softer boundary between what is firmly real and what is merely possible. A different weighting system for what gets included in the narrative. This is why dreams tolerate contradictions so well. The waking mind is constantly pruning. It removes inconsistencies because inconsistencies are dangerous when you're navigating a physical world. In a dream, inconsistency is not dangerous. It's informative. It reveals what the mind is willing to combine, what themes it's trying to process, what emotions it's trying to metabolize. So, dreams can feel like they contain more than one reality at once. They can feel like they are stitched from multiple lives, multiple timelines, multiple versions of you. And even if that's only a poetic description, it matches the felt experience. In REM, the brain is also emotionally amplified in a way that's hard to ignore. The same event in waking life might register as mildly stressful. In a dream, it becomes the end of the world, or the beginning of a love story, or a reunion that leaves you aching when you wake up. The emotional color is turned up, and that makes the dream feel significant. Meaning is one of the strongest glues in memory. So, when dreams feel more meaningful, they feel more real. And there's one more detail that quietly supports the looser feeling. When you're awake, you are constantly receiving signals from your body that tell you where you are in space, the pressure under your feet, the balance of your head, the weight of your arms, the orientation of your spine. In dreams, those signals are different. Your body is largely still. The world you move through is generated internally. So, the sense of movement becomes strangely unconstrained. You can fly, you can fall for a long time. You can run without getting tired. You can feel wind on your face without needing air to actually move. It's not that the brain is trying to trick you, it's that the brain can create the sensation without paying the physical cost. And because the physical cost is absent, the experience can feel oddly pure, almost like consciousness freed from its usual friction. That's a seductive idea, and it's exactly why people reach for spiritual explanations, or multiverse explanations, or hidden signal explanations. When something feels that vivid and that free, it's tempting to assume it must be tapping into something beyond the mind. But the mind itself is already beyond what most people imagine. A sleeping brain can generate a universe, populate it with people, and then convince you emotionally that the stakes are real. It can give you nostalgia for a place that never existed. It can give you grief for a person you never met. It can give you relief that lasts all morning, even if nothing changed in your waking life. And this is the bridge we need for what comes next. Because once you accept that REM sleep can loosen the rules of the editor, you can begin to understand why certain claims feel plausible to the human heart, even when they remain unproven to science. If the boundaries in the mind can soften, if continuity can be generated on demand, if the self can shift without warning, then the experience of another life no longer sounds like pure fantasy. It sounds like an extreme version of something the brain can already do. Not evidence of parallel worlds necessarily, but evidence that the mind has access to a wider space of narrative reality than waking life allows. And that alone is strange enough to sit with for a moment. Because tonight, as you drift, you may notice the grip loosening, the storyteller in your head becoming less strict, the world becoming less literal and more symbolic, less factual and more meaningful. And in that softened space, it can feel for a while as if you are not just resting. It can feel as if you are briefly allowed to be someone else, somewhere else, with a history that doesn't belong to the morning. Whether that history is memory, imagination, or something we haven't learned how to name yet, the looseness itself is real. It's the brain changing gears. And it's one of the quietest, strangest freedoms a human being gets to experience. Lucid dreaming is where this whole conversation stops being purely poetic. Because most of what happens in dreams is private. It's subjective. It lives behind a locked door. You wake up with a story in your hands and no way to prove what really happened inside your head. Lucid dreaming is different. A lucid dream is a dream where the dreamer realizes in the middle of it, this is a dream. And that tiny moment of recognition changes everything. Because once you know you're dreaming, you can sometimes make choices. You can test the environment. You can try to remember what you plan to do. You can even attempt something that sounds impossible on paper. You can communicate. This is why lucid dreaming becomes a credibility anchor in stories like ours. Not because it proves anything about parallel worlds, it doesn't, but because it shows something that is already strange enough. The dreaming mind can become aware, deliberate, and interactive while the body remains asleep. Waking life feels like the only place you can be you in a coherent way. Lucid dreaming quietly disagrees. In a sleep lab, researchers can track the body like a map. They can see when you enter REM sleep, the phase most associated with vivid dreaming. They can measure brain activity patterns that look different from deep sleep. They can watch the eyes flicker beneath closed lids. They can monitor muscle tone dropping so low that your body doesn't act out the dream. And then, in the middle of all that sleeping biology, the person inside the dream can do something purposeful. The classic method is beautifully simple. Before falling asleep, a lucid dreamer and a researcher agree on a signal, something that can slip through the usual barrier between dream and body. And eyes are perfect for this, because during REM sleep, the eyes still move. Those movements are measurable from the outside. So, the agreement might be, when you realize you're dreaming, move your eyes left, right, in a deliberate pattern. Not in the vague way eyes naturally dart during REM, but in a clean, rhythmic pattern that stands out. Then the dreamer sleeps, time passes, the room stays quiet, the sensors keep recording, and then it happens. A distinct sequence of eye movements appears on the monitor. It's like a lighthouse blinking from inside the dream. A message that says, I'm in here, and I know I'm in here. That alone is remarkable, because it means awareness can ignite inside the dream without waking the body. It means the dream isn't always a passive movie you watch. Sometimes it becomes a place you can stand up inside. But it gets even stranger. Once you can confirm lucidity, you can attempt tasks. Researchers have asked lucid dreamers to do things like count, clench a fist in the dream, walk a set number of steps, or perform a rehearsed sequence. And while the body remains still, the brain and eye signals can show timing and intention that match the reported dream actions. It's not perfect. It's not like reading subtitles from the mind, but it's enough to demonstrate something crucial. The dreaming mind can follow instructions and keep a plan. That's the piece many people underestimate. We tend to picture dreams as chaotic fragments, random imagery, emotional static, and sometimes they are. But lucid dreaming reveals that the sleeping brain can run a stable self-model long enough to remember a goal and execute it. A mind dreaming can still behave like an agent. Now consider how powerful that is for our larger theme. If you can build an entire dream world and then wake up inside it and then send a signal back out through the body, you've created a bridge between two states that normally feel separated by a wall. Dream and waking, inner and outer, private experience and measurable behavior. And once that wall has even a small doorway in it, the imagination starts asking new questions. Not wild ones necessarily, just questions that become harder to dismiss. If awareness can be present in the dream, then dreams aren't only randomness. They can be a space where information is processed intentionally, where perception and decision-making still occur, where something like conversation might be possible. That idea sounded like science fiction for a long time, and then researchers began trying it. The modern experiments are often described in a way that feels almost unreal, so we need to keep it grounded. The setup goes something like this. A person sleeps in a lab. The researchers monitor their brain and body signals and wait for REM sleep. When the signals suggest the person is dreaming, the researchers present a simple stimulus, maybe a sound, a light, or a spoken question. The dreamer, if lucid, responds using an agreed system. Sometimes it's eye movements, left to right for yes, up down for no, or a number of cycles to indicate a number. Sometimes it's facial muscle signals, carefully measured, because most muscles are quiet in REM, but tiny movements can still be detected. And the results, in a small number of cases, are astonishing. The dreaming person answers, not after waking up, not as a memory, but while they remain asleep. A question is asked from the waking world, and a response comes back from inside the dream. It's not a long chat, it's not a philosophical debate, it's more like tapping on a wall from both sides. Tap, tap, do you hear me? Tap, tap, yes. And that's enough, because it shows the sleeping mind can receive information, interpret it, and generate a deliberate reply without fully transitioning into wakefulness. That doesn't mean the dream is real. It doesn't mean there's a portal to another universe. It simply means the brain's boundary between internal simulation and external input is not absolute. Sometimes a little signal leaks through. In everyday life, you've probably felt the softer version of this. A sound in your room becomes a sound in your dream. A phone vibration becomes an earthquake in the dream. An alarm becomes a siren in a city you've never seen. The brain is always doing something elegant. It's folding external input into the dream narrative. Lucid dreaming takes that folding process and adds a conscious hand to it. Instead of being swept along, the dreamer can notice the input, recognize it as input, and respond back. So, when we call lucid dreaming a credibility anchor, we mean this. It's one of the few areas in dream research where subjectivity can be paired with a measurable signal. Not perfect, not constant, but real enough to study. And it opens a new kind of possibility, the kind our competitor loves to lean into. If a mind can be awake inside a dream, then the dream is not merely a glitch, it's a state with rules. Different rules than waking life. Yes, but still structured enough to contain awareness, memory, intention, and response. Now, notice what this does to the emotional weight of those parallel life dreams. If you've ever had a dream that felt like it had history, like it had continuity, like it wasn't just a scene but a life, lucid dreaming offers a gentle explanation for how such a thing could feel so coherent. Because the brain can maintain a storyline, it can protect a narrative, it can place a stable you inside it, and sometimes it can even let that you wake up enough to notice what's happening. Lucid dreamers often report something else that matters here. The environment can push back. You might think lucidity means total control, like being a director on a set. Sometimes it does. But many lucid dreamers describe the dream world as partly autonomous. Characters don't always obey. Doors don't always open. The dream can surprise you. That is exactly the flavor we need later, when we talk about dreams that feel like other lives, the sense that you're not inventing every detail consciously, the sense that the experience is happening to you, even when you're aware. So, here's the grounded takeaway. Lucid dreaming demonstrates that the sleeping brain is capable of a hybrid state, a state where you're dreaming, but not entirely lost, a state where the mind can become reflective, a state where communication in limited ways can occur. And once you accept that, a second thought follows quietly behind it. If the dreaming mind can communicate with the waking world, even in simple signals, then the borders around dreaming are more flexible than they appear. Not wide open, not magical, flexible. And in a story like ours, that flexibility matters, because it suggests that dreaming is not a sealed chamber. It's not a locked vault of random images. It's a dynamic system that can sometimes exchange information across states, which leads to a question that feels like a whisper, not a claim. If a dreaming mind can answer a researcher in a lab, what else might it be capable of answering? If the boundaries between waking and dreaming can soften, what happens when those boundaries soften between one dream and another, between one mind and another, between one version of a story and a neighboring version that feels just close enough to touch? We'll stay careful. We'll keep our labels honest. But we don't have to pretend the mind is simple. Lucid dreaming is already proof that the sleeping brain can do something extraordinary. It can wake up without waking up. And once you've seen that, the next ideas don't feel like pure fantasy anymore. They feel like an attempt to mop the edges of a real, strange ability the human mind already has. There's a particular kind of headline that lands with a little electric shimmer in the mind. Two people, asleep, exchanging messages. Not later, over coffee. Not after they wake up and compare notes. But during the dream itself, while their bodies remain in that quiet, REM sleep stillness. If you've ever had a dream where you tried to speak and your mouth wouldn't cooperate, this sounds impossible. And that's exactly why it matters for our story. Because dream-to-dream communication is one of those ideas that sits right on the edge between science and folklore. If it's nothing, it's a fascinating illusion. If it's something, even something small, it suggests that sleep is not a sealed room. It's more like a house with thin walls, and occasionally a lamp flickers under the door. So let's keep this careful. No miracles, no grand claims, no proof of telepathy. Just a slow, honest look at what researchers attempt, what they report, and why it catches the imagination of so many people who felt their dreams behave like a second life. First, the foundation. We already know it's possible, under certain conditions, for a sleeping person to receive a stimulus and incorporate it into a dream. A sound becomes part of the dream's weather. A faint voice becomes a radio in the distance. A gentle beat becomes a truck backing up somewhere in the dream city. The brain doesn't stop processing the world when you sleep. It changes how it prioritizes it. During REM sleep, your mind is generating vivid internal experience, but the gate isn't welded shut. Small signals can still slip through, and the dream tries to explain them. Now add lucid dreaming to the picture. If someone becomes lucid, if they realize they're dreaming, then they're not just being carried by the dream. They can notice an input and respond in a planned way. In some lab setups, they respond with agreed-upon eye movement patterns. That gives researchers a thin, reliable thread between the outside world and the dreamer's inside world. Once you have that thread, it's tempting to pull on it. And that's where the REM space angle enters the conversation. The basic idea is simple to state and hard to do well. If a sleeping, dreaming person can receive a message and send a reply, then maybe two sleeping people could exchange messages, each in their own dream state, using a system that roots through the waking world's instruments. It's not mind-to-mind in the mystical sense. It's more like this. Two islands in fog, each with a lighthouse. They can't touch. But if the fog is thin enough and the light is bright enough, you can signal across the distance. So imagine two participants sleeping in controlled conditions. Each is monitored. Each has a pre-agreed language of simple responses, yes/no, or a few basic symbols. Each can be prompted with stimuli at the right moment, ideally during REM, ideally when lucidity is likely, ideally when the dream is vivid enough to hold attention. A message is sent into Dreamer A's sleep, perhaps a word, a tone, or a simple question. Dreamer A responds with an agreed signal. That signal is recorded and interpreted by the researchers. Then the researchers send a corresponding stimulus into Dreamer B's sleep. Dreamer B responds back and so on. That loop, sleeping mind to lab to sleeping mind, is what gives people the thrilling phrase, dream-to-dream communication. And even in the most optimistic telling, it's important to underline what kind of communication this usually means. Not paragraphs, not secrets, not the plot of someone's dream being streamed into someone else's dream like a movie. It's typically small, structured information, a single word, a number, a yes or no, a short prompt with a short reply. That might sound underwhelming until you remember the context. These are two brains that are, by ordinary standards, offline. Their bodies are resting. Their waking attention is gone. And yet, in some reports, the dreaming mind appears capable of receiving a targeted cue, recognizing it as meaningful, and responding intentionally while remaining asleep. That's why people describe it as impressive but not magic. Because the impressive part is not the content, it's the state. It suggests that dreaming consciousness can sometimes behave like a listening, responding system, not just a private hallucination you drift through. Still, there are careful questions stacked underneath this. How do we know the dreamer was truly asleep at the moment of the response? How do we know the stimulus didn't partially wake them? How do we separate a genuine, interpreted cue from coincidence, especially with signals like eye movements that can occur naturally in REM? How do we control for expectation effects, where a participant's mind is actively searching for cues because they want the experiment to work? These aren't cynical questions. They're the normal questions science asks when something sounds too clean to be true. And the honest answer is, this area is early, limited, experimental, which is exactly why it functions so well in the evidence-adjacent portion of a competitor-style narrative. Because it's not airtight proof of anything paranormal, but it is a real attempt to test the permeability of dream boundaries, and it points to a possibility that's subtle and unsettling in the best way, that the sleeping mind may be more interactive than we assume. Now, if you've ever had a dream that felt socially real, like the people in it weren't just cardboard cutouts, you already understand why this hits so hard. Dreams regularly simulate other minds. They generate dialogue you didn't consciously plan. They produce characters who disagree with you, surprise you, and sometimes feel more psychologically alive than you'd expect from a private imagination. When a dream figure looks you in the eye and says something you didn't see coming, the mind feels less alone. And if experiments suggest that messages can be exchanged with sleepers in a structured, minimal way, It gives that feeling a new flavor. It hints that sleep might be a state where the mind can interface, not just invent. But we have to be gentle here, because there's a common misunderstanding. Even if dreamer A and dreamer B can exchange simple information through a lab-mediated loop, that doesn't automatically mean their dreams are merging. It doesn't mean they're meeting in a shared dream world. It doesn't mean they're strolling through the same dream street together, waving at the same dream moon. It can mean something simpler. Both minds are receiving external cues and producing intentional outputs, while their dreams incorporate those cues in their own private ways. In other words, the communication may occur at the level of signals and responses, not at the level of a shared dream environment. Still, notice what that does to the story we're building. A few minutes ago, dreams were framed as private, unshareable, ephemeral. Now, they're starting to look like a state with a mailbox. A narrow one, a slow one, a carefully controlled one. But a mailbox all the same. And once you admit that, a new question forms naturally in the listener's mind, not as a conclusion, but as a curiosity. If the boundary between waking and dreaming can be crossed with a message, if two sleepers can trade a tiny piece of information, even indirectly, then maybe the boundary between one mind and another is not as absolute in REM as it feels at noon. And if boundaries between minds can soften, even slightly, the imagination takes one more step. What about boundaries between versions of a mind? Not in the fantasy sense, not as a claim that you're literally traveling to a multiverse every night, but as an idea about how experience is organized. A waking self is a tightly edited story, a continuous thread held together by attention, habits, identity, and the steady pressure of reality testing. Sleep loosens those stitches. Dreams recombine memories. They remix emotions. They slip into scenes that feel familiar without knowing why. They conjure people who feel like they have history with you, even when you've never met. If the dreaming state is already more permeable, more receptive, more associative, more willing to connect distant dots, then small communications and strange feelings of continuity become less shocking, not proven, not explained away, just less impossible. And this is where the REM space style beat becomes valuable for retention, because it gives the audience a grounded wonder, not believe this, but notice how weird the mind already is. Notice how close your inner world can get to the outer world. Notice how a sleeping brain can still listen. Notice how it can still answer. And if it can do that, then perhaps it can do something else that we haven't learned how to measure cleanly yet. Something that feels like an echo, a crossfade, a familiarity without a source. Not proof, just a door left slightly ajar, a thin line of light under it. Enough to make you wonder, when a moment hits you with that sudden, unreasonable recognition, whether you're remembering something real, or whether your brain is simply very good at making the unknown feel like home. Sometimes it arrives with no warning at all. You're standing in a grocery store aisle you've never visited, looking at a brand you've never bought, and the world suddenly tilts into a strange, quiet certainty. I've been here before, not as a thought you choose, more like a feeling that chooses you. A soft pressure behind the eyes, a tiny tightening in the chest. For a few seconds, everything looks normal, but it feels pre-recorded, like reality is repeating a scene you somehow watched in advance. And then it passes. That experience has a name, déjà vu. And for most of us, it's rare enough to feel mysterious, but common enough to feel human. It's a little glitch in the story your mind tells you about time. A moment where the present wears the costume of the past. What makes déjà vu so captivating is the way it behaves. It doesn't feel like ordinary remembering. Ordinary memory has details, a context, a reason. You remember the taste of a restaurant because you ate there. You remember a street because you walked it. You remember a song because it played during a particular season of your life. Déjà vu often has none of that. It's memory without a source, familiarity without a key, a lock turning in the dark without you ever seeing the door. And that's why it's so tempting, especially in the universe we're building tonight, to treat déjà vu like a hint, like a tiny leak from somewhere else, like a footprint from a life you didn't live. But before we let it become myth, It deserves the dignity of science. Because neuroscience has been paying attention to déjà vu for a long time, and the careful view is both less magical and, in its own way, even stranger. A useful starting point is this. Your brain doesn't store your experience as one smooth recording. It breaks life into components: sights, sounds, emotions, spatial layouts, meaning, and then stitches them together into the sense of now. That stitching usually feels seamless, so seamless that you forget it's happening. But familiarity itself is a process, and like any process, it can misfire. One of the simplest explanations for déjà vu is a mismatch between two systems your brain uses to tag reality. There's the system that recognizes patterns quickly, almost like a fast, "this seems known" signal. And there's the system that checks details and context, more like, do we actually have a memory of this, and where does it belong? When those two signals align, you get ordinary recognition. When they disagree, you get something uncanny. A strong feeling of familiarity, followed by a blank search for the source. That mismatch is already enough to produce the emotional punch of déjà vu. The body reacts because the mind is telling it, this matters, this has history, even if the history can't be found. Researchers have also noticed that déjà vu often shows up when the brain is doing something that looks like checking or monitoring, especially around decisions, conflicts, or uncertainty. You walk into a new place that resembles an old place in a few subtle ways. The angle of the hallway, the pattern of shelves, the lighting, the way voices echo. Your brain's pattern matcher pings, familiar. Meanwhile, the detail checker searches for a matching episode and comes up empty. The result is a brief, shimmering tension between signals. Some studies and models talk about this as a kind of memory conflict or verification moment. Your mind is evaluating whether what it's seeing belongs to something already stored. It's almost like the brain momentarily flags the present as something that should be in the archive and then realizes it isn't. And there's another fascinating idea that shows up in the scientific conversation. Déjà vu may be related to the way memory is normally formed in the first place. Every day, your brain is constantly deciding what counts as new, what counts as important, what gets written down. If, for a split second, the brain mistakenly tags the present as already stored, then the present can feel like a replay, even while it's happening. Not because you actually lived it before, but because the "this is new" label got swapped for "this is known." That's not a supernatural explanation. It's a bookkeeping error. But notice how unsettling that is. It means the sense of time, past versus present, depends partly on internal labeling. And if labeling can flicker, then the lived reality of "this has happened before" can be manufactured out of ordinary circuitry. The strongest clinical clues come from the places where déjà vu shows up too often. Some people with certain kinds of temporal lobe epilepsy report intense déjà vu as an aura or warning sign, moments where familiarity surges with unusual force. That suggests something important. The machinery that produces familiarity is closely tied to temporal lobe regions involved in memory, recognition, and emotion. And once you're thinking about the temporal lobe, the hippocampus, and the broader memory network, déjà vu starts to look less like a mystical sixth sense and more like a window into the brain's architecture. The brain doesn't play back life like a perfect video file. It reconstructs, it predicts, it checks, it compresses. Familiarity is not a photograph, it's a signal, and signals can be noisy. Even so, if déjà vu were only a malfunction, we'd expect it to feel random and meaningless. But many people report the opposite. They describe it as patterned, showing up during life transitions, decision points, travel, emotional strain, fatigue, or periods when sleep is disrupted. That's not proof of anything paranormal, but it suggests that déjà vu may be more likely when the brain is under a certain kind of load, when attention, memory, and prediction are running hot. And that brings us back to sleep. Because sleep, especially the way it reorganizes memory, may change how these signals behave. Dreaming doesn't just entertain you, It processes your day. It blends fragments. It replays themes. It rehearses possible futures. It takes the raw footage of your life and edits it into something more manageable, more emotionally coherent, more filed. If you spend the night building vivid internal worlds, then wake up and step into the real one, your brain might be primed for overlap. A curve of a staircase in a dream, a tone of voice, a street corner that never existed, but resembles the dream's geometry just enough to trigger the familiarity system. In that sense, déjà vu might sometimes be the ghost of a dream, an internal scene brushing against an external one. Not a portal, not a message from a parallel life, just a subtle collision between two kinds of experience your mind stores in the same biological medium. And yet, even with all that grounded explanation, déjà vu keeps a sliver of mystery. Because the feeling is so clean, so confident, so persuasive. For a few seconds, your mind doesn't say, "I'm guessing this is familiar." It says, "I know." That certainty is what opens the door for speculation, especially in the competitor-style vibe we're following, because the brain's confidence can be louder than the brain's evidence. So here's the careful pivot, labeled clearly as what it is: a poetic hypothesis, not a conclusion. What if déjà vu is sometimes an echo? Not a supernatural echo, not a proof of multiverses, not a guarantee that you've lived another timeline. Just an echo in the sense that two different paths could share a similar shape. In many worlds' language, you could imagine countless nearby branches, versions of reality where the broad structure is similar, but a detail differs. The same city, but you took a different job. The same afternoon, but you turned left instead of right. The same relationship, but one conversation went differently. If experience can be thought of as a continuously updated story, then déjà vu could feel like running your hand over a page you didn't write, yet the paper texture feels familiar. Again, that's not how science currently proves anything. It's a metaphor. But metaphors are powerful because they match what the experience feels like: familiarity without ownership, an impression that belongs to you, but not to your remembered life. And there's another way to say it, even more gently. Déjà vu may be the mind noticing how many versions of you exist inside one brain. You are not one fixed person. You are a collection of tendencies, alternate selves, half-formed futures. The version of you who almost moved away. The version who almost said yes. The version who almost picked a different major, a different city, a different love. Most days, those versions stay quiet. They remain hypothetical. They fade. But once in a while, the mind brushes against a moment that could have belonged to any of them, and it rings like a bell that's been tapped before, not by another universe, by your own internal multiverse of possibility. So, when déjà vu visits, it can be held two ways at once. Scientifically, it can be a brief mismatch in memory processing, a familiarity signal arriving without its matching file. Experientially, it can feel like a whisper from a life adjacent to yours, a thin shadow of a road not taken. And both can be true in the only way that matters for a sleepy mind. One is an explanation, the other is a meaning. You don't have to pick one as a belief. You can simply notice what déjà vu reveals, that the brain is constantly balancing memory and prediction, constantly weaving a story that feels continuous, and occasionally letting you glimpse the seams. A seam is not a tear. It doesn't mean reality is broken. Sometimes it just means your mind is powerful enough to make the present feel like it has a past, because it's always comparing what is to what could have been. Sometimes a dream doesn't feel like a story your brain made up. It feels like a place you return to. You wake up and you're not just remembering images. You're remembering a layout, a route, the way the light looked in a hallway you've never seen in waking life, the sound of a voice you swear you've heard before. And the strangest part is how quickly the feeling locks in, like the dream was waiting in a drawer, already folded, already real, and all you did was open it. People describe this as more real than real, and in the quiet aftermath of a vivid night, it's easy to see why. A dream can carry weight for hours or days. It can tug at your mood like a thread you can't stop touching. You might find yourself thinking about it while brushing your teeth, or while staring out a car window at a red light, as if your mind is still halfway standing in that other place. Now, science has plenty to say about why dreams can be intense. Emotion, memory, brain chemistry, the way sleep reshuffles our inner world. But tonight we're listening for a different kind of signal, not proof, not a claim, just patterns that show up again and again in people's stories. Patterns that feel less like randomness and more like continuity. If dreams were only noise, you'd expect them to scatter like confetti, different every time, no structure, no return addresses. But many people report something else. They report signatures, 4 recurring features that make a dream feel oddly parallel, like an alternate timeline brushing up against the edge of the one you call your life. The first signature is the one that startles people the most, because it behaves like a television show you didn't know you were watching. A dream that continues, not just the same theme, actually the same story. You fall asleep and you're back in that neighborhood again, back in that apartment again, back in that job again. The same you, but not quite. The same characters, but with histories you can feel without ever being told. The dream doesn't reintroduce itself. It doesn't explain. It just resumes, like it assumes you remember everything because, in that world, you do. And what's eerie is that the continuity isn't always obvious while you're dreaming. Sometimes it's only after you wake up that you realize, wait, that argument I had in the dream tonight, it's connected to the decision I made in the dream last week. That person I met tonight, I've met them before. The dream wasn't a one-off, it had a past. This is why people say some dreams feel heavy. It's the weight of context, the sense that there are chapters you didn't fully witness but somehow inherit. In ordinary dream science terms, it could be your brain reusing a stable set of internal sets, a familiar cast of ideas and emotions, a repeating narrative template. Memory loves to build with what's already nearby, but the subjective experience can feel more specific than that. It can feel like a life with momentum, a life where time has passed between visits. And once your mind starts recognizing that pattern, it begins to watch for it. The way you start noticing the same street name everywhere after you've moved to a new city. It's not that the sign suddenly appeared, it's that your attention finally learned its shape. The second signature is even quieter. It's not a plot, it's geography. Stable locations. A house that isn't your house, but you know where the bathroom is without thinking. A city you can navigate without a map. A school with a courtyard and a particular staircase, and a weird little vending machine tucked behind a pillar. You know it so well that, in the dream, you don't even admire it. You simply use it. What makes this so compelling is that the place often stays consistent across different dreams. Same layout, same corners, same feeling of home, even if it's not your home. People will describe a dream city that becomes their personal mythology, an alternate hometown they keep returning to. It may not correspond to any real-world location, but it behaves like one. It has districts, landmarks, shortcuts, the sense of distance. In waking life, familiarity is expensive. It takes repetition to build. We learn places by walking them, by getting lost, by forming little habits. Which light switch is stiff, which step creaks, where the sun hits at 4 p.m. So, when a dream place arrives already familiar, the mind asks a natural question. Where did that familiarity come from? Again, the safe explanation is that the brain is brilliant at constructing spatial models. It can stitch together pieces of places you've seen, scenes from movies, fragments of old neighborhoods, and the general architecture of human life. Dreams are remix artists, but the feeling of stable locations carries a more haunting possibility. What if that dream world has its own continuity, and you're stepping into it midstream? Not proven, not even testable in a clean way. But as a story the mind tells itself, it's potent, because it treats the dream not as a hallucination, but as a destination. The third signature is the one that can make you sit up in bed after waking, because it blurs the line between my imagination, and someone else. Characters with autonomy. In many dreams, other people behave like props. They show up to deliver a line, create a conflict, or set a mood. They're clearly dream people, moving like paper figures in a wind. But in these parallel feeling dreams, the characters can feel stubbornly independent. They disagree with you in ways you didn't expect. They reveal information you didn't know you knew. They have their own plans, their own private emotions. Sometimes they look you in the eye with an expression that feels too specific to be generated on the spot, as if something behind them is thinking too. And the dreamer's report is often the same. I couldn't control them. I couldn't predict them. They felt real. This is a psychological minefield because our brains are perfectly capable of generating surprise. In fact, prediction and surprise is what brains do all day. Your mind holds models of other people, how they talk, how they react, what they might say next. And those models can run automatically, even while you sleep. That's why you can hear a friend's voice in your head without trying. The simulation can be so convincing that it feels external, but the subjective punch remains. If the character felt autonomous, then the dream felt less like a puppet show, and more like a social reality. And that social reality is what makes people wonder about other versions of themselves. Because if a dream can produce a whole ecosystem of minds that feel independent, then it begins to resemble a world. Not a perfect one, not a stable one, but a world with other wills moving through it. Even if it's only your brain running a brilliant internal theater, it still raises a question that fits our larger theme. What if consciousness is, in part, a kind of binding force, holding one thread as me, and labeling everything else as other? If sleep loosens that binding even a little, it could explain why dream characters sometimes feel like they're standing on their own feet. The fourth signature is the strangest, because it messes with the most fundamental thing we use to measure our lives: time behaving strangely. In ordinary dreams, time is messy. Scenes jump, years vanish. You're in a kitchen, and then you're on a highway, and then you're back in your childhood bedroom. The edits are brutal, the logic is loose, but some dreams do something different. They create the impression of duration, not a montage, an actual sense that you lived through days, weeks, months, that you had routines, that relationships evolved, that you learned a schedule, that you carried responsibilities, that you made choices that had consequences, and then lived with those consequences long enough for them to matter. These are the dreams people describe with a kind of grief, because if the dream felt like months, then waking up feels like abandonment, like leaving a place where a version of you was in the middle of a life. From a scientific standpoint, the simplest explanation is that the brain can simulate a long narrative in a short time, and then tag it with the feeling of, "This took a long time." Memory does this even when we're awake. A single photo can make you feel like you're holding an entire summer. A smell can compress 10 years into one breath. Time is as much a feeling as it is a clock. But that doesn't stop the experience from being profoundly unsettling, because it hints at an unsettling possibility. What if your sense of continuous life is not strictly tied to minutes passing, but to a story being bound together? And if that binding can happen in sleep, then the mind naturally wonders, could it be binding to something else? Some other stream? Some other version? Some other now? None of these signatures prove anything, but together they create a mood, a particular texture of dreaming that people keep recognizing in one another's stories, even across cultures, even across decades. Continuing narratives, persistent places, independent characters, elastic time. They're like 4 fingerprints pressed into fog. And once you start noticing them, you may begin to notice another, quieter detail. Sometimes these dreams don't just feel vivid, they feel informed, as if there are facts inside them you didn't consciously put there. And that opens the door to the next question, one that's both thrilling and dangerous if you hold it too tightly. What happens when a dream seems to know something you don't? There's a moment some people describe, usually with a little hesitation, when a dream doesn't just feel vivid or emotional, it feels informed. Not in the sense of a grand prophecy or a glowing message delivered from the universe, more like a small, stubborn detail that lands in your mind with the quiet confidence of something you've already learned, even though you can't remember learning it. A street name you've never seen while awake. A specific year attached to a memory that isn't yours. The layout of a building that doesn't exist in your life, yet the dream shows you where the stairwell turns, where the light switches sit, where a hallway narrows into a kind of alcove that makes no narrative sense, unless it's simply accurate. And when you wake up, that detail clings to you differently than the rest. It doesn't fade like dream fog. It sits there like a pebble in your shoe. These are the dreams people often describe as unknown knowledge dreams. Sometimes they come with a strange urge to verify, to open a browser, to search a phrase, to look up a headline, to check a map, to ask a friend, to see if the detail was pure invention or something else. It's important to be gentle here because the human mind is incredibly skilled at convincing itself. It's also incredibly skilled at noticing patterns after the fact. And dream memory is famously slippery. It can rewrite itself in the minutes after waking, smoothing rough edges into a story that feels coherent. So, the honest approach is a balanced one. These experiences can be explained in very ordinary ways, and yet, they remain deeply intriguing. One ordinary explanation is the simplest, and it's almost poetic in its own right. We forget far more than we realize. Your brain absorbs facts without asking permission. You catch a line of dialogue in a documentary while scrolling. You see a headline in the corner of a screen at an airport. You glance at a street sign during a road trip and never think about it again. You overhear someone say the name of a town, a medical term, a foreign phrase, a date. It sinks into the basement of memory, unlabeled, unfiled. Then sleep arrives and the mind starts rummaging. Dreams are not only stories, they're also sorting machines. They take scraps of information and shuffle them with emotion, with fear, with desire, with unfinished business. And sometimes, a scrap that was quietly stored comes back up with no context. So it feels like it came from nowhere. That's not mystical. That's just memory doing its strange work in the dark. But here's what makes people pause. Occasionally, the dream detail seems too specific to be a random scrape from everyday life. Someone dreams of a newspaper headline with an unusual phrasing, and later they encounter a remarkably similar headline. Same unusual wording, same subject matter. Maybe not identical, but close enough to feel like a shiver. Someone dreams of a building interior with an oddly shaped atrium and a mural in a particular location. Then months later, visits a city museum for the first time and finds a space that matches the dream's geometry in a way that feels unsettling. Someone dreams of a person's full name, first and last, someone they've never met, and then that name appears later in a context they couldn't have predicted. A new coworker, a distant relative's wedding invite, a name on a mailbox in a neighborhood they don't know. These stories are hard to evaluate from the outside because the dream is private and the verification is usually messy. But what matters for the tone of our exploration is the psychological texture, the dreamer's sense that the mind briefly behaved like a radio that tuned past its usual station. There's another ordinary mechanism that can create this feeling: pattern recognition with an incomplete data set. Your brain is constantly predicting. It's constantly building the next frame. That's how you drive without consciously calculating trajectories. That's how you understand a sentence before it's finished. It's how you sense that a room is tense before anyone speaks. In dreams, the brain keeps predicting, but the input is different. The mind is less anchored to external reality. It's freer, and sometimes it runs simulations more boldly. It takes a few cues and generates a plausible future headline, a plausible building layout, a plausible new song, a plausible news event. Most of those simulations vanish and are forgotten, but if one happens to align later with reality, it becomes unforgettable. And this is where coincidence enters the story, not as an insult, but as a statistical truth. Given enough dreams, some will seem to match something later. We dream thousands of dreams across a lifetime. They cover themes that are common in human life: relationships, danger, travel, illness, success, loss, surprise. Reality eventually supplies examples of all of them. So, when a dream predicts something, we have to ask, did it predict it in a meaningful, specific way? Or did it brush against a broad theme that reality was likely to produce anyway? This is the difference between I dreamed something bad happened and I dreamed a specific bridge in a specific city closed on a specific date due to a specific cause. One is common and wide. The other is rare and narrow. The challenge is that dream memories often tighten over time. A broad dream can become narrower in the retelling, especially if the later event supplies details your mind can borrow. Not because you're lying, because memory is a creative editor. So if you want to treat these unknown knowledge moments with respect, the best tool is not belief or disbelief. It's method. Some people keep what you could call a verification ritual, but gentle. Nothing obsessive, nothing that turns sleep into a stress test. If a dream contains a suspiciously specific detail, you write it down immediately after waking, not the whole dream, just the detail as cleanly as possible. A phrase, a name, a date, a location, a sketch of a floor plan. 1 or 2 sentences, maximum. Then you add a timestamp. Then you leave it alone. Later, hours, days, sometimes weeks. You check, if checking makes sense. You look up the phrase. You search the name. You compare the sketch to a real place if you encounter one. You see whether the detail matches something that existed before the dream, which would suggest forgotten memory, or something that emerged after, which would be harder to explain but still not proof of anything extraordinary. Even more important, you track the misses. Because confirmation bias is powerful. If you only remember the hits, you build a private mythology that feels stronger than it is. But if you keep a simple record of details that didn't match anything, you restore the correct perspective. The mind produces a lot of material, and reality occasionally lines up with it. That alone can be strangely calming. It turns the experience from the universe is sending me messages into my brain is an incredible generator, and sometimes it surprises me. There's also a quieter kind of verification that doesn't depend on the internet at all, internal consistency. Sometimes the unknown knowledge isn't a fact you can Google. It's a feeling of expertise in the dream. You speak a language fluently. You play a piece of music you've never practiced. You use a tool you've never held. You recite a sequence of numbers with confidence. In those cases, the verification might be as simple as waking up and realizing that the fluency was more felt than real, that the language was convincing but nonsensical upon replay, that the music had emotional coherence but no stable structure, that the numbers were vivid but evaporated instantly. This is not a failure, it's a clue. It shows how easily the brain can generate the sense of knowing without the content being reliable. And then, every so often, someone reports the opposite. The dream phrase turns out to be a real word. The architectural detail matches an actual style. The made-up name belongs to a real historical figure they had never heard of, at least consciously. When that happens, the honest response is a soft one. It's interesting. It may be coincidence. It may be forgotten exposure. It may be the brain's extraordinary ability to infer and reconstruct. And if you want to let yourself wonder, you can wonder without turning wonder into certainty. Because certainty is where these stories become sharp, and tonight we're keeping them smooth. So, when a dream seems to carry unknown knowledge, you can hold 2 truths at once. Your mind is a library with many unlocked doors, and sleep can wander into rooms you didn't know existed. And in that wandering, it can sometimes produce details that feel like they came from somewhere beyond you, whether that beyond is simply the hidden depth of your own memory, or something stranger that we don't yet have a clean language for. Either way, the experience is real in the most important sense. It changes the way you wake up. It makes reality feel a little less sealed, a little more porous. And once the idea of porousness enters the room, it naturally leads to the next kind of weight, because facts are one thing, but bonds are another. Sometimes the most convincing evidence people feel isn't a headline or a street name. It's the ache of a relationship that follows them into the morning, as if they truly left someone behind. Sometimes the most convincing part of these dreams isn't a fact you can look up. It's the weight. A dream can leave behind a feeling that behaves like a relationship. Warmth, loyalty, tenderness, protectiveness. Emotions that don't usually appear at full strength for something imaginary. And when you wake up, it can feel as if you've been pulled out of a life that was still in motion. People describe it in quiet, practical ways. They wake with the strange urge to check on someone who doesn't exist in their waking world. They feel guilty, as if they missed an appointment, forgot a promise, left a conversation unfinished. They carry a specific kind of longing that doesn't match their day-to-day life, like homesickness for a place they can't name. And in the deepest versions of these dreams, the relationship has history. Not a vague sense of companionship, but a lived-in familiarity that feels earned. Shared routines, old jokes, small habits, the private language two people build over time. A hand reaching for another hand without thinking. A glance that communicates a whole paragraph. Sometimes the dream relationship isn't romantic at all. It's a child you're responsible for, a sibling who depends on you, a parent who is present in a way they never were in waking life, a friend with a kind of loyalty that makes you feel safe in your bones. And then morning arrives, and the room is ordinary, and the sheets are just sheets, and the emotional system inside you doesn't immediately accept that the person is gone. Grief is a strong word, but it's the closest one. Not always sharp, not always dramatic, often soft, confusing, and heavy in the chest. A sense that something real ended while you slept. From a neuroscience perspective, this is not as strange as it sounds. The brain is built to attach. Human beings are meaning-making animals, but even more than that, we are bond-making animals. Our nervous system is designed to track faces, voices, patterns of care and threat. We carry maps of the people we love, what they sound like when they're tired, how they react when they're stressed. The kind of silence that means they're fine, and the kind that means they're not. Those maps don't vanish just because you close your eyes. In dreaming, especially in the emotional intensity of REM sleep, the brain can light up the social and emotional networks that make relationships feel real. The limbic system, the regions involved in emotion and salience, can be vivid and active. Meanwhile, some of the more strict reality-checking systems are quieter than they are in daylight. The result is a mental theater where feelings have the volume turned up, and the usual skepticism is turned down. That combination can create a person who feels astonishingly present. Not a cardboard cutout, not a symbol, a full-bodied someone with momentum. And once a dream generates that kind of presence, your attachment system does what it was built to do. It treats the bond as meaningful. It tags it. It stores it. It rehearses it. It protects it. This is why people can wake up heartbroken over someone they've never met. Not because the dream proved another universe. Because the brain doesn't experience relationships as footnotes. It experiences them as survival. Belonging has always mattered. Love has always mattered. Even grief, in a strange way, is the mind's proof that the bond was registered as important. And then there's a detail that makes these dreams feel even more uncanny. Sometimes the dream relationship appears to continue. A recurring person, a recurring home, a recurring family. Some dreamers describe nights that return them to the same place, like a second address. A small town with streets they could navigate. An apartment with a familiar view. A kitchen they can walk through in the dark without bumping into anything. And inside that place, the relationships age. They evolve, they accumulate time. You argue with someone and make up later. You move through seasons. You see a child grow taller. You learn a friend's new job. You feel a relationship cool or deepen or break. This is where the emotions get complicated, because the dreamer may wake up with the sensation of having lived years in a bond that can't be explained to anyone without sounding ridiculous. How do you say casually, I miss my dream family? How do you admit you felt proud of a dream child's small achievement? How do you explain that the tenderness felt more stable than anything you've known in waking life? The mind doesn't only create faces, it creates roles, it creates commitments, it creates the feeling of being needed. And when you wake up, you can feel as if you abandoned those commitments, like you left without saying goodbye. There's also a more subtle version of this weight. The dream relationship can reveal a hunger that waking life has been ignoring. Sometimes the person in the dream isn't real, but the feeling is an honest messenger. The dream might be showing you the kind of safety you crave, the kind of patience you wish you had, the kind of closeness you're missing. Not as a lecture, dreams rarely lecture, but as an experience. In that sense, the dream relationship becomes less like a paranormal event and more like a mirror held up by the sleeping mind. It asks gently, what kind of love do you believe you deserve? And because the dream can deliver that love with such effortless realism, it can leave behind a bittersweet clarity. You wake up and realize you've been living with emotional scarcity, or you've been carrying loneliness like background noise, or you've been functioning well, but not feeling well. The dream doesn't have to be another timeline to matter. It can still be an encounter with a missing part of you. But this is also where discernment becomes important, because the attachment system is powerful, and it doesn't always know the difference between helpful longing and harmful obsession. If someone begins chasing the dream relationship night after night, trying to force it back into existence, sleep can become performance. Pressure builds, the mind tightens. The very softness that makes dreaming rich can disappear. So, the healthiest way to hold these experiences is with a kind of respectful distance. You can acknowledge the bond your brain created without letting it replace your waking life. You can treat the dream person as meaningful without treating them as a literal obligation. You can let the emotion teach you something about love, about loss, about your needs, without turning it into a verdict about reality. And there's another layer that makes these dream relationships feel profound. Across cultures and across history, people have always treated dream bonds with seriousness. Long before brain scans and sleep labs, human beings noticed that dreams could produce devotion, warning, comfort, and grief. They noticed that the dream world could deliver messages that felt wise, or encounters that felt sacred, or reunions that felt healing. It's not an accident that so many traditions developed language around dreams, language that treats them not as nonsense, but as a kind of inner realm with its own rules. Because even if the dream person is made of you, the experience of loving them can still change you. It can soften you. It can make you more forgiving. It can make you brave enough to have a difficult conversation in waking life. It can remind you, in the most intimate way, that your mind is capable of building a home, even in the dark. And perhaps that's why this section matters so much. The unknown knowledge dreams are fascinating, but they can stay abstract. This part is not abstract. It lands in the heart, not the search bar. A relationship, real or dream, leaves fingerprints. It changes your mood, your posture, your patience, your appetite, your sense of time. So, when someone wakes with that lingering emotional gravity, the kind that follows them through the morning like a quiet shadow, it doesn't mean they proved anything about parallel universes. It means they touched something deep and old inside the human system, the need to belong, and the ache that arrives when belonging is interrupted. And once you recognize how universal that is, you start to see why so many civilizations, so many centuries, have treated dreams as more than random noise. Not because they all agreed on what dreams are, but because they all recognized what dreams can do. Long before sleep labs and brain scans, people still noticed something simple and unsettling. Dreams don't always feel like pictures in your head. Sometimes they feel like visits, a door that opens in the dark, quietly, without asking permission, into places that carry their own weather, their own logic, their own gravity. And across history, in cultures separated by oceans and centuries, humans kept arriving at the same intuition. Whatever dreams are, they seem to brush up against something larger than ordinary waking life. In many indigenous traditions, dreams were not treated as disposable noise. They were treated as messages, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from animals, sometimes from the land itself. Not every dream was sacred, and not every image was taken literally, but the attitude was different from the modern habit of shrugging and moving on. A meaningful dream might be shared in the morning, the way you'd share a warning about a storm coming in. It could guide a decision, repair a relationship, or remind someone of their responsibilities to the community. In that worldview, sleep wasn't an off switch. It was a different kind of listening. In parts of ancient Egypt, dreams were taken seriously enough to become an institution. People sought out dream temples, hoping that sleep might bring a cure, a sign, or a direction. Priests and interpreters developed systems for reading dream images, not as random fireworks, but as a language. Sometimes it was practical: health, fertility, harvests, politics. Sometimes it was personal: grief, fear, longing. And even if we now explain much of dream content as the brain processing emotion and memory, it's still striking that an early civilization looked at the dream state and thought, this is a place where the mind becomes receptive, a place where the usual boundaries soften. In South Asian traditions, dreams often appear as a bridge between layers of reality. In Hindu thought, waking life, dreaming, and deep sleep can be framed as different modes of experience, different rooms the self passes through. The dream world may be less stable than waking life, but it isn't dismissed as meaningless. It's treated as a state with its own lessons, its own distortions, and sometimes its own glimpses of truth. The language changes from region to region and era to era, but the theme remains. Sleep is not merely rest, it can be inquiry without effort. Buddhist traditions, too, approach dreams with a kind of calm seriousness. Not because dreams were always prophetic, but because dreams offered a gentle demonstration of how reality is constructed. In a dream, you can feel certain beyond doubt, and then you wake and realize you were wrong. That doesn't make the dream worthless, it makes it instructive. It suggests that the mind can generate worlds that feel completely solid from the inside. And once you've seen that, you become less rigid, more curious, less sure that waking life is the only stage where meaning can appear. In classical Greek and Roman worlds, dreams were also tangled up with guidance, omen, and psychology. They lived at the crossroads of myth and medicine. Some writers cataloged dream symbols the way a naturalist catalogs birds. Others treated dreams as communications from gods, or as signals from the body, or as a mixture of both. Even when interpretations were wrong by modern standards, the obsession reveals something human. People felt that the night mind had access to information the day mind couldn't easily reach, especially when emotions were too complicated to face directly. And then there are the shared practices that appear again and again: dream journals, dream sharing, dream incubation. The idea that if you set an intention before sleep, if you ask a question softly without forcing it, the mind might answer in imagery, not because a cosmic voice is guaranteed to speak, but because attention shapes what the brain prioritizes. Your concerns, your bonds, your fears, your unfinished conversations, they line up at the edge of sleep like quiet guests waiting their turn. All of this matters for our story tonight because it shows something important. The dreams as gateways idea did not arrive with quantum language. It arrived with human experience. People in the past didn't talk about many worlds or entanglement. They talked about ancestors, spirits, omens, and sacred places. Today we might talk about memory consolidation, emotional regulation, predictive processing, and the brain's talent for simulation. Different vocabulary, same wonder. And in some ways, the ancient view is surprisingly compatible with a careful modern one. You don't need to claim that dreams are literal travel to say they can open gates inside the mind, gates into grief you've avoided, love you didn't admit you needed, courage you didn't know you had, gates into patterns you've been repeating, gates into the emotional truth of your life, delivered in metaphor because metaphor is sometimes the only language the nervous system understands at night. But there's also a second, more eerie possibility that ancient traditions keep alive. The feeling that the dream state might occasionally contain something that doesn't fit neatly into personal memory. A detail, a mood, a sense of familiarity that arrives without a clear source. This is where the stories get stranger and where we have to keep our balance, holding curiosity in one hand and skepticism in the other. Because the honest truth is, human beings are pattern finders. We are meaning makers. We are storytellers. And dreams are the perfect canvas for those instincts. Still, it's hard to ignore how consistent the gateway theme is across time. It's as if the human species keeps circling the same intuition. When the body is still, the mind becomes porous. The borders blur. The inner world grows vast. And once you accept that, even in a purely psychological sense, it becomes easier to understand why some people report dreams that feel like they're brushing up against time itself. Why certain dreams feel like warnings or echoes or previews, not as proof of prophecy, but as the brain doing what it does best, running simulations, sampling possibilities, stitching together signals you didn't consciously notice. Ancient traditions gave that feeling a sacred frame. Modern science gives it a cognitive frame. Either way, the experience remains. Sometimes the night mind behaves as if it's reaching beyond the ordinary present, feeling around in the dark for what might be coming next. Sometimes a dream doesn't just feel vivid. Sometimes it feels ahead of you, not in a cinematic way, no glowing prophecy, no booming voice, more like a quiet, unsettling nudge. You wake up with a mood that doesn't match your life, a tightness in your chest, like your body already knows something your mind hasn't been told yet. Then, days later, an email arrives, a phone call, a headline, a small turning point, and your brain reaches backward and whispers, "Wait, didn't I already stand in this moment?" This is the territory people call precognitive dreams, and it's one of the most emotionally persuasive dream experiences humans report, because it feels personal, intimate, and oddly specific. It also happens to be one of the easiest experiences for the mind to misread, simply because of how memory works. When you dream every night, you generate a massive amount of content: images, conversations, settings, feelings, fragments of story. Most of it fades. A small fraction sticks, usually the part soaked in emotion. And if you live long enough, some small fraction of those sticky fragments will line up with real life by coincidence alone. Not because the dream predicted the future, but because the future is full of familiar building blocks: streets, faces, fears, routines, patterns. So, the careful view starts here. Many precognitive hits can be explained by chance, selective recall, and the brain's talent for editing the past. We remember the dream that matched. We forget the 100 dreams that didn't. And still, even after you say all that, the feeling remains. Because the experience of "I dreamed this" is not only about accuracy, it's about timing. It's about the strange way the dreaming mind can assemble a scene that later feels like it belongs to waking life, like it was waiting in the wings. One gentle explanation is that your brain is always forecasting. Even when you're awake, it's running quiet predictions. What will this person say? What will happen if I take that risk? What's the likely outcome? You don't notice most of it. But in sleep, especially in REM, those predictions can become stories. The mind takes the ingredients it has and simulates a handful of plausible tomorrows. Not supernatural, not mystical, just a nervous system doing what it evolved to do, preparing you. Sometimes you dream about an argument before it happens, because your brain already sensed the tension. Micro expressions, tone shifts, the way someone avoided your eyes. Sometimes you dream about loss because part of you has been tracking vulnerability. A parent's voice getting weaker, a friend pulling away, a relationship drifting. Sometimes you dream about a surprising opportunity because you've been quietly noticing the conditions for change, the way your workplace is shifting, the way a door is slowly opening. The dream feels like prophecy because it arrives before the conscious story does. The dream is the early draft, but your outline wants something slightly stranger than prediction. It wants the soft pivot. What if some dreams don't just sample likely outcomes, but sample possible futures, plural, not one line, but a fan of branches? If you imagine many worlds as a map of outcomes, then the future isn't a single destination. It's a landscape, a spread of near-term variations, a version where the call comes on Monday, a version where it comes on Thursday, a version where it never comes at all, a version where you take the job, a version where you hesitate, a version where you move to that city, a version where you stay. From that perspective, a precognitive feeling dream wouldn't be seeing the one true future. It would be brushing against a nearby possibility, one that sits close to your current trajectory. And that framing is important because it keeps the mood mysterious without turning the story into a claim you can't defend. You're not saying dreams predict, you're saying dreams might rehearse. They might be the mind's way of walking through adjacent rooms in the house of tomorrow. And if you've ever had one of those dreams that felt like a warning, you know the emotional punch isn't in the details. It's in the tone, the atmosphere, the sense of inevitability. It's the way the dream makes you wake up and look at your life differently, more awake, more careful, more grateful. There's another angle here that makes the precognitive feeling even more convincing. The brain's tendency to tag familiarity. In waking life, familiarity is useful. It keeps you safe. It says, I've seen this pattern before, pay attention. But in dreams, familiarity can attach to things that don't have a clean source. A face that feels known, even though you can't place it. A house that feels like home, even though you've never lived there. A moment that feels like déjà vu before it even happens. If the brain has a familiarity stamp, and that stamp sometimes fires incorrectly, you can get a dream that feels like a memory of tomorrow. And when real life later provides a similar shape, a similar emotional contour, the stamp fires again, and your mind stitches the two together. That stitching can happen honestly, without you trying to exaggerate anything. It's the brain doing its best to create continuity. Still, it's hard to resist the poetic possibility that dreams might occasionally function like echoes from a neighboring present. Not a different planet of reality, but a nearby version of your life. So close it shares many of the same props, but not the same plot. If you've ever had a dream where you learned something, and then woke with the feeling that you'd been there, you understand why people reach for parallel language. It's not because they want to be dramatic. It's because ordinary language doesn't fit. And this is where we keep the tone soft and honest. No matter what interpretation you prefer, the practical value of these dreams can be real. A dream that feels ahead can make you notice what you've been ignoring. It can push you to call someone you've been meaning to call. It can make you slow down. It can make you choose kindness sooner. It can make you take the warning seriously, not as fate, but as information your deeper mind has been collecting. So if we hold the mystery carefully, we can say it like this. Maybe the most precognitive part of dreaming isn't that it knows the future. Maybe it's that it knows you. Your patterns, your trajectory, your unspoken fear, your unadmitted hope, well enough to sketch the futures you're most likely to meet. And if the universe truly does contain many possible presents, each branching quietly in the background, then sleep might be the one time your consciousness loosens its grip on a single line of story and briefly tastes the flavor of what else could be. Not proof, not a prophecy, just a soft, eerie possibility, drifting at the edge of the night. If we treat these parallel feeling dreams as messages, the first question isn't whether they're literally true. The first question is simpler. What do they change inside you the next day? Because even a dream that's only a dream can still be a useful place to practice being human. Think of sleep as a private laboratory your mind visits when this daytime world finally stops interrupting. In that lab, you can run simulations without consequences. You can test a conversation you're afraid to have. You can step into a different job, a different city, a different version of yourself, then wake up with a clearer sense of what felt right and what felt heavy. That's why people sometimes describe dreams as a quantum mirror, not because the dream proves another universe exists, but because it reflects possibilities you keep hidden from yourself while you're awake. In waking life, we protect our identity. We keep the story consistent. In sleep, the story loosens. New versions walk onto the stage. So here's the practical move. Instead of asking, "Was that real?" you ask, "What did that dream version of me know? What was it protecting? What was it willing to risk? What did it grieve? What did it choose quickly?" Without weeks of overthinking. A therapist might call this parts work, or symbolic processing, or emotional consolidation. You don't have to use the labels. You can keep it gentle and simple. Write one sentence about the dream that won't leave you alone. Name the feeling it carried: relief, dread, longing, love, shame, hope. Ask one honest question. What decision in my real life has that same feeling attached to it? Sometimes that's all it takes for a dream to become a tool for growth instead of a trap. You're not obeying the dream. You're listening to what it reveals about your values, what matters enough to haunt you, and what matters enough to call you forward. And if you ever meet a wiser, calmer future you in a dream, you can use it as a rehearsal. Borrow one small behavior from that version: a boundary, an apology, a brave step, a softer response. Not because fate demanded it, but because you discovered it. Use dreams as insight. Let them add meaning, not obsession. Before we let the night fully close around us, it helps to place a small, steady boundary on everything we've explored. If dreams ever feel like doorways, if they feel like other lives, other timelines, other versions of you, remember this. You don't owe a dream your devotion. You don't have to chase it, decode it, or rearrange your waking life around it. Let curiosity stay gentle. Let attachment stay light. Your real relationships, your real body, your real morning, those still matter. And if a dream ever makes you feel pulled away from your life instead of more present inside it, that's your cue to step back, breathe, and return to what's solid. And yet, it's hard not to wonder where all of this could go. We're living in a century where the sleeping brain is no longer invisible. Scientists can map patterns. Interfaces are being built that listen to signals from the body and translate them into new kinds of feedback. AI is learning the shapes of our stories. Someday we may be able to label dream states with more precision, to nudge nightmares away, to help people practice calm inside sleep itself. Maybe we'll learn to bookmark a dream softly, safely, without turning it into a spectacle. Maybe we won't. The horizon stays hazy, but the direction is clear. The mind is becoming a landscape we can chart without fully owning it. So tonight, take the best part of this topic and keep it simple. Your dreams are a place your brain rehearses meaning. Whether they're stitched from memory, imagination, or something stranger, they are still one of the quiet miracles you get for free. If you'd like more calm science stories like this, mysteries you can think about for a moment, then drift away from, tap, like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And now, you don't have to solve anything. Just let the day fade. Let the thoughts slow down. Good night, and sweet dreams, fellow traveler.